This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about today. A day that will live in infamy. December 7th. I think back and, all of this weekend's talk about the shootings in San Bernardino being the latest Pearl Harbor, kind of just to me, I don't know. There's part of me that goes, someone should smack anyone who says that, and repeatedly. Maybe a little sense will rattle between their ears. Just blows the mind. But a day to remember nonetheless. And really to, kind of think back on and the changes that came from that and the direction our country decided to take then. And hopefully we don't make the same mistakes. Maybe we do some of the same things that brought us together in the coming days, years, and months. Just a moment to remember. Anyway, big news today in the Pennsylvania State Senate. Yes, they have come up with a budget. Yeah, they've agreed to it. And overwhelmingly, I mean, the numbers pretty impressive. You actually had 43 Pennsylvania state senators. 43 of the 50 say yes. I didn't think it was possible. I did not think that day would come. But here it is, the quick numbers that we see to this point. And of course, the devil always in the details. But it's going to increase spending on education, public education, $350 million. They're calling historic. Now that's after, you go back to the Corbett years after gutting $1 billion. But either way, it's a step forward, and I'm not unhappy with it. The overall plan, about a $30.8 billion spending plan. I didn't see anything in there about taxing the drillers. I didn't see anything in there about closing the Delaware loophole. I didn't see anything in there about raising personal income tax rates. I did find some comments that a cigarette tax, which I didn't even really know was part of the discussion, that's going to jump. So you smokers, the rumor that I'm hearing $1.60 a pack jump in taxes, that might be the incentive to help you to quit. Just kind of a thought. They're also talking about a tweak in how the banking industry is being taxed. And I find that Senate Majority Leader Jake Corman's comment, this is a budget that the Senate can pass and the governor can sign and allows us to move forward on the issues the people of Pennsylvania want to move forward on. I'm not so... I think most people wanted the drillers taxed. I think that was overwhelmingly what came out of the governor's election. Fund education, tax the drillers. Seems pretty simple, but just my thought on it. So, but this is a start. Now, as I understand, the House reconvened today. They're not going to be able to take up this budget before Wednesday. It is possible, there would have to be some gymnastics, I think, for this to be passed and just in time for Friday, to where they get to go to the big party, get to go to the ball, if you will, get to put on the party dress and go to the ball. But it'll be interesting to see where that goes. And it got me thinking, to be honest, of what we could have had. And I think back to when the governor gave his budget address, and I said, this is a big boy budget. This is a budget that says we've got bills, we have to pay it. We have children that need education. We have lots of stuff that needs to be done. This budget that the governor proposed at the time said, hey, we're not going to pay for things with gimmicks anymore. We're going to right the ship. We're going to stop the Arthur Anderson style accounting that had been going on during the Corbett years. Because even after, and this is the part that bothers me, even after all of the belt tightening and all of the, hey, we're going to go and screw those poor people that Corbett did his 4 years, we're still structurally in the same situation we were when he came into office 4 years ago. And that's with a budget deficit, structural budget deficit, that smoke and mirrors and incense and candles, not going to help. So I said at the time, the governor's idea of, we need to raise personal income tax. They're going to do some sales tax stuff. You need to do it. Tax the drillers, need to do it. Close the Delaware loophole, something I haven't heard anybody talking about. And for those who don't know what the Delaware loophole is, again, this is one of those things lost in the shuffle. Because to me, that's the easy lift here. Close the loophole. Close the damn loophole. Close the window. Don't let the money go. But what we do here, and I guess it's, from a corporate side, really very brilliant. You set up the magic box there in Delaware, and all of the profits that are gained here in Pennsylvania get to go through the magic box and come out the other side fresh and clean. And of course, not touched by Pennsylvania taxpayers. And from the corporate side, that's great. But from funding education and roads and bridges and all of the things that we need to do, paying for police forces and fire departments and all of that, well, that kind of leaves you, me, and the rest of us picking up the tab while our corporate friends walk away. And to me, that should have been first, foremost, right on the agenda, closing that window, closing that door, and not just slamming it shut. But as I've found, and I haven't seen anything yet, but I went back to the governor's budget. And one of the key things that, and I don't know what the numbers are going to work out, but I don't think 350 million is going to get us anywhere close to the state picking up half of the cost of public education. And that's kind of where when this whole system was set up, that was kind of the gig. The state was going to pick up half of it. The local taxpayers would pick up the rest. Over the years, and you ask anybody who's ever sat on a school board, what's happened is the state continually heaps on mandates and then continually walks away from funding them, to where now you're looking at the state picking up about a third instead of a half of the cost of education. So what does that mean? Well, that means either the local taxpayers are going to have to fork over more money, which angers especially people who don't have kids in the schools anymore, our seniors and folks like that. Or it means diminished opportunities. It means less course offerings, less extracurriculars, a whole bunch of downside stuff. I don't know that this gets us to that laudable goal of half. Also, I don't see anything in this proposal to increase the minimum wage, because the governor had said, look, we want to increase the minimum wage up to $10 an hour. And why is that part of the budget game? Well, it's part of the budget game because it says, you know what, if you're a low wage employer, we're not going to allow you to take advantage of all of the social programs that we offer, be it heating assistance or food stamps or school lunch programs. Go down the list of things that taxpayers help really to fund the low-wage workforce. And by increasing it up to $10 an hour, you cut that amount of budget money needed to fund that. And saying, look, employers, if you want that, that's what you're going to have to do. Makes sense to me. Also, the governor wanted to modernize the wine and spirit shops. Not sure what the language on that is. We may hear more in the coming days over that. And as I see, there's nothing here that would talk about increasing the personal income tax. They're broadening some of the sales taxes. That'll be interesting to see which special interests won out. And then the big one for me, the big one being the charter school reimbursements and how we fund, especially the cyber charters. I haven't seen any language on that. So there are a lot of questions to this budget. There are a lot of questions to, well, first, whether the House is even going to take it up. And I guess it's how badly the House wants to go to the ball. Do they want to go to the big party on Friday, or do they want to spend Christmas continuing this battle? And then at this point, you might as well say the heck with it. Don't do a budget at all, and we'll fight over the next one over a 2-year budget. So you back pay all of the other stuff. But if you do that, how many schools close? How much pain? How much suffering? How much of this do we have to go through? So we're gonna figure this out. We'll find out more. We're gonna talk with our friend Dave Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, about what he sees in the budget. Also, I hear there's something banging around on pensions. He would be the guy to lay that out for us. We're going to talk to him in the next segment. Stick around. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1931. That was the day that protesters staged a hunger march on Washington, D.C. 1,600 protesters took part in the march. Communist organizers helped to organize the protest. One of the demands of the march was unemployment insurance for workers who had lost their jobs. The country was in the throes of the Great Depression, caused by the stock market crash of 1929. Far too many people had seen their entire life savings wiped out by the crash and subsequent bank failures. Millions were out of work and families were losing their homes. There was a growing anger in the country over what was perceived as President Herbert Hoover's indifference and ineffectual dealing with the crisis. The media focused on the communist ties to the D.C. Hunger March, but the idea of the March on Washington grew. The next year, a Pittsburgh priest led an army of 12,000 jobless men to the Capitol to demand unemployment legislation. Then that May, a former cannery worker named Walter B. Walters organized World War I veterans to protest in D.C. They called themselves the Bonus Expeditionary Forces. They demanded early payment of a bonus that Congress had promised them for their service in World War I. The movement of working people grew as a weary and hungry nation demanded action from its elected leaders. As a result, Americans voted President Hoover out of office in the 1932 election. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected on a platform that the U.S. government should act to address the dire conditions of the millions of unemployed. Finally, in August 1935, President Roosevelt signed the Social Security Act into law. This act contained a provision for unemployment insurance. It was a major step towards establishing unemployment protections for workers in the United States.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm Eric Woostewald. The Secretary of Defense, Ash Carter, recently announced that the U.S. military will open up all combat positions to women. But on Fox and Friends, Fox News correspondent Leah Gabrielle was dismissive of the new policy. Here's Gabrielle and host Elizabeth Hasselbeck.
Can they really handle this? Is this going to make our military stronger? Because the real question here is, it shouldn't be an equal opportunity employer, I don't think. The question is, can women make the military, these specific units, stronger?
I'm hearing terms like Petri dish. Do you believe this is a social experiment? If so, is this the time?
It is a social experiment, and I've been in that social experiment. When I became a combat fighter pilot, I was one of the first women to do it, and I had more senior male officers say, we don't know if this was a wise decision or not.
Other conservative commentators also responded with vitriol, including radio host Rush Limbaugh, who called the move absurd, and the website National Review Online, who called it, quote, a historic mistake for which, quote, America will pay a blood price. But as Defense Secretary Carter noted during his announcement, women will be allowed to serve in all military combat roles because, quote, we cannot afford to cut ourselves off from half the country's talent and skills. For more on this and other stories, please visit MediaMatters.org.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous. The salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME.
We make Pennsylvania happen!
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So I guess a weekend of work got the state Senate at least moving in the right direction. Over the weekend I had heard everything was falling apart and everything was over and the impasse was going to continue. And then today, the Senate passes a budget 43-7. Got to be honest, didn't think that number was possible. So it'll be interesting to see what the House does here in the coming days. And here to talk a little bit about his thoughts of the budget one, and if maybe they get to go to the big ball on Friday. I've asked David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, to come talk with us. Dave, thanks for taking time for us.
Well, thanks for having me, Rick, and I won't be at that ball Saturday, by the way.
All right. Neither will I. I didn't get an invitation. I find it pretentious and, well, a whole bunch of problems with it being in New York and not Pennsylvania and all of that other stuff.
You got it.
So let's get to this budget. I mean, over the weekend, we were told nothing was going to happen, and I kind of liken that to they were mad they had to work the weekends since nobody could tell me when the last time was. Give me your thoughts on it.
Well, I tell you, I was just there an hour ago at the Capitol, and one of the ranking legislators framed it up pretty nicely. He said, if anybody tells you that they know what's going on, they're full of bulla. They do not know. It's such a fluid, moving target with all the parameters of everything there that is kind of frightening. But the Senate did do the budget piece. And again, some of the details are sketchy, but I think you're right. The governor had wanted about $560 million from pre-K to higher ed. Mix it up however you want, basic education, higher education, special ed, but he was looking at that number at this point. There are some revenue enhancements floating around. One is what's called the vendor discount, and that's the discount of 1% that the merchant that collects your sales tax gets if they pay their taxes on time. That's been floating around there for a long time. And as chairman of the Clear Coalition, a group of mostly public sector unions, we've been advocating this for so long. And really, it's an archaic kind of a device. When people were doing their bookkeeping by hand, there was a reward for them to get the money to the state on time. Now it's a little line item on a computer that they flick the switch and it goes flying over. So there's nothing involved. And you're talking about the big guys, the Walmarts of the world, that are getting a heck of a break on this. Instead of sending 6% over, they only send 5%. There's also, looks like, as you indicated, some sales tax exemptions. The sales tax at this point is not going to change from the basic 6%, but they are looking at some exemptions in the services, amusements area, as well as another one on cigarettes. I understand, though, that cigars and smokeless tobacco is not taxed at all in Pennsylvania. Cigars is the lowest with Florida. Those aren't part of the mix. So really, the Senate budget is better than what I guess I understand that the House is contemplating. The House is contemplating a really a dust off of a last Corbett budget. So I guess basically that's where we're at this point.
I mean, that makes sense. I mean, the Senate's generally a little saner than the House, especially here in Pennsylvania. But, it's always been curious to me that smokeless tobacco and cigars get away while cigarettes don't. And I guess I liken that to especially when you're looking at the cigars and the cigarettes, the upper echelon tend to be more cigar smokers, where you look at the working folks tend to be the cigarette smokers. And I guess it kind of fits for me.
Yeah, I never thought of it that way. We're absolutely right. I mean, probably a lot of my members are more chewers than they are cigars. So that's a good point. So, and also, as you mentioned too, those peripheral issues of the pension and the liquor are on this high noon standoff in each of these chambers of the legislature, whereas the pension piece that the Senate is trying to send over to the House is this called the side-by-side pension, which is basically just cutting your contribution rate in half. Half of it goes to a defined benefit, half of it goes to a defined contribution, or what we call 401ks. That is out there. However, what's troubling mostly is one of the correspondents from the Republican leadership about this new plan is that it would be, if it gets passed, this side-by-side, Pennsylvania would have the worst pension plan in the nation. It's just, I don't know why anyone would brag about that. But it's out there. Currently also, they have 4 different changes for current employees. The existing workforce under the pension plan would be changed in areas of what's called option 4, shared sacrifice, their final averaging. And these kinds of changes we feel are unconstitutional for current employees. So there's going to be a battle if that thing gets in there, if the governor should let it slide through. The other piece is the wine and spirits. The House and primarily the leader, Mike Turzai, is hell-bent on getting a privatization bill passed. Right now, I think some of the talk was just taking wines out of the state stores, the wine and spirit stores, and moving them over to supermarkets for sale or restaurants. The problem with that is that 50% of the income from the wine and spirit stores comes from wine. So if you take 50% of your income out of your show, Rick, you're not going to be doing the show that you want to do and be able to do the things and pay for the stuff you need to do. So it's a bad package there. But again, in the next hour, it could change everything. So we're staying tuned.
Yeah, it's one of those things. But, and I look at the pension thing because I want to go back to that for a second, because as you're laying out this side-by-side plan, that sounds to me to be something that would be much more costly for the taxpayers and much less beneficial for the workers. Or am I off base on this?
Well, no, you're right. I mean, there's, for one thing, when you make any kind of plan, no matter what it is, we've now got a third tier of pensions that has to be administered. And that takes all kinds of accounting stuff and calculations and more staff hired just to take care of another plan. So that in itself does create. And that's the other thing, when we talk about both of the wine and spirits privatization and the pension changes, there is admission up front. It's either going to cost them money or definitely not going to save any money in the budget. So it's just a waste of time, futility-wise, that we go down this path as we start, talking about how we can rectify this piece. So, we're still monitoring the situation. The pension, like you said, I said, is going to be very, very bad. And also, when you throw on top of the fact that they want to change what current employees are, that's problematic. And finally, and they're still battling with this, are the legislators, going to be in or out of the new plan? They want to change it for state employees, but they're not sure if they should be changed. They should keep whatever the heck they have. So it's really contentious. The pension's being pushed on the Senate side. The liquor is being pushed on the House side. I don't know if they'll come to agreement. They may just be looking at just a budget passing.
Yeah, because at some point you've got to get this thing passed, because we're not too far away from the next State of the State address and the next budget to be put out by the Wolf folks. I mean, there's part of me that says if we don't get this done here by Christmas, by the end of the year, what the heck? We might as well just wait till next year and start over.
Absolutely. And if you recall, in one of the Rendell years, we had a budget. It wasn't until Christmas time that it was passed. However, they had interim budgets that they moved through the system. So I know the governor is trying to keep the pressure on to get, as much as he can without the interim budget, because all the interim budgets do are just delay the inevitable. Nothing changes except for a month or 3 months, however long it is. So, yes, if it goes I remember when we were back in July and people were saying, man, we may not get anything by Labor Day. And then they said Thanksgiving, and now we're looking at Christmas. So it's truly unfortunate we're in this situation, especially for the nonprofits, the school districts, the counties. They're starting to hurt badly, and it's truly a shame.
As representatives of the workers in those counties and in the states, what kind of pain are you hearing from agencies that don't have the money or are afraid that the money's drying up?
Well, that's it. And the ones that don't have are the ones that are hurt. The school districts are the poorest, are the ones having a real problem. I know Steelton, right down the street from you, was struggling to get some monies together, as are Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. So yeah, and the nonprofits, especially the small ones, United Ways, that live literally from paycheck to paycheck for their services, they are hurting pretty badly. So unfortunately, they don't have some of the manpower or lobbying power that some of the manufacturers do, as you mentioned, closing that Delaware loophole, which seems to evade everybody all the time, or the Marcellus Shale, which unfortunately the governor has backed off on, which is just sitting out there, money that's, I think, just easily raked in. It's truly unfortunate we can't go to those revenues just because of those kinds of systems.
No, I mean, to me, the messaging out of this, if the budget is what it is, there may be something, as you've said, that will be fantastic when all the details come out. But the winner in this appears to me to be the drillers. They're going to walk away while we're not funding education where I think we should be, while we're allowing the Delaware loophole to be open. I mean, there's just so much that's being left on the table here. And I understand the give and take of negotiation, but the governor ran on that. And the people of Pennsylvania said, tax the drillers. I mean, that was very clear to me.
Yeah, and that's really where the governor was being elected. He made it very clear during his campaign, we should go after this pool of money that's sitting literally under our feet in Pennsylvania, because that Marcellus Shale is such a large pocket of natural gas. So you're right. I don't know if it could be thrown in at the last minute, even if it's a small piece. But right now, it doesn't look like it's not even on life support.
Yeah. The other thing that the governor talked about, and this is the last thing I wanted to ask you about, in his budget address back at the beginning of the year, he talked about increasing the minimum wage. It's my belief and my understanding that that's pretty much been maybe not even put to the back burner, just probably shelved and completely forgotten about at this point. Any thoughts that you're hearing on increasing the minimum wage? Because I think this is a big part of our budget problem as well.
Yeah, no, they've if it's just whispered every once in a while, I don't think it's really on the front burner. The ones I just talked about, the pension, the liquor, obviously some of the revenue enhancements, the vendor discount, the sales exemptions. You're right. You said in the beginning the personal income tax is not going to be touched. So some of these things are just there, and the length of time we're at this point, some of that stuff is probably going to fall off the table. But we hope to get something close to what the governor was looking for, especially in the education, because that was devastated under the Corbett administration by removing that money. So almost we're getting back to where we should have been years and years ago. But at least it looks like we're going to make progress somewhere.
So the absolute last question, do they get to go to the ball this weekend?
I know that was they didn't want to say it out loud, but that was in the back of a lot of folks' mind. I thought, we were going to have something this weekend. It still doesn't happen. There's a battle within the leaderships that's crazy. So I'm not betting this one.
Yeah. So don't get the party dress from the cleaners, I guess. That should be the message. Dave, I appreciate you taking time for us. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Rick. See you later.
Great talking with you, Dave Philman, Executive Director, AFSCME Council 13. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
This is the fate of the American dream. I've got no time now to go and cry now. Before I take a job, don't want to go for. I'm just searching for my dignity. This is the fate of the American dream. This is the fate of the American dream. This is the fate of the American dream.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
There is this sort of unanimity of opinion that something has got to get done here.
Historic United Nations climate talks now underway in Paris.
Technology-driven advances are relentless. They're going to drive down costs, and they're basically going to make the cheapest thing to do the cleanest thing to do.
Governments and billionaires launch huge new investments in clean energy. Plus,
governments currently engaged in this round of climate talks will want to know that there is more than just an executive branch in our system of government.
Republicans working hard to undermine progress in any way they can.
All of that undermining and progress straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comments.
Well, the world is in turmoil and falling apart in so many different ways, especially with ISIS. Our president is worried about global warming. What a ridiculous situation.
And no one knows ridiculous situations better than you, Mr. Trump. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, it's quite remarkable with so much going on in the news. It's easy to not even notice the fact that this historic climate change conference is now actually underway in Paris, as you have been waiting for and anticipating for so many months.
Oh, yeah. It's history being made in Paris right now at the Global Climate Talks. The nations of the world are now meeting in Paris for the 21st Conference of the Parties of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or COP21 for short. The goal is to complete a comprehensive international binding agreement for all nations to cut the greenhouse gas emissions that cause dangerous global warming in order to keep the planet's temperature from rising more than 2 degrees Celsius over pre-industrial times.
Yeah, good luck with that.
I know. It's about 3.5 degrees Fahrenheit. Human activity has already raised temperatures by 1 degree Celsius. So, by the way, we are halfway there.
Just to clarify, halfway to the bad thing, not
Yes.
halfway to the good thing.
That's right. U.S. President Barack Obama opened the UN climate conference with an acknowledgement that developed countries like the U.S. bear responsibility to take action.
There is such a thing as being too late. And when it comes to climate change, that hour is almost upon us. I've come here personally as the leader of the world's largest economy and the second largest emitter to say that the United States of America not only recognizes our role in creating this problem, we embrace our responsibility to do something about it.
A successful global agreement includes transparent mechanisms for all countries to review their progress and ratchet up their targets as new technology becomes available. It includes measures to reduce deforestation and, the biggest area of conflict, funding for developing nations so that they can prepare for climate change impacts and hopefully leapfrog over the pollution phase of development while still lifting their people out of poverty. And most importantly,
That it is an ambitious target that seeks a low carbon global economy over the course of this century.
in other words, phasing out fossil fuels completely. One thing the Paris conference will not do is solve climate change. National pledges to reduce emissions so far are not enough to stay below the key threshold of 2 degrees Celsius. So this is only the beginning. The talks create the architecture, the framework for the decades-long transition to a low-carbon and eventually zero-carbon economy. This is the first time all nations have agreed to do so. President Obama concluded his participation in Paris with a hopeful message.
I'm optimistic. I think we're going to solve it. I think the issue is just going to be the pace and how much damage is done before we are able to fully apply the brakes.
And so far, several major new financing programs have already been launched. The White House announced 2 sweeping initiatives. The U.S. and 20 developed nations will increase investment in clean energy research and development. A separate initiative headed by Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates will mobilize $20 billion in private venture capital investment. And India announced a new global solar energy partnership with 121 developing countries. But here in the U.S., congressional Republicans still trying to undermine President Obama in Paris.
No.
This week passing 2 new resolutions to overturn Obama's landmark new emission standards for power plants, even though the White House will veto the legislation. They said it's to send a message to the world community that the U.S. might not abide by any agreement.
And to send a message that they don't like this planet really at all. They have no interest in keeping it livable, apparently.
Yet the Republicans are out of step with Americans. A new New York Times CBS poll this week finds 2/3 of Americans want the U.S. to sign on to the UN agreement.
For much more on the stories we covered today, including COP21, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us and follow us on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So the Delaware loophole, again, I cannot believe this is not on the table. And really, a lot of the other discussions around the economic development schemes and all of that, why that isn't on the table as well is curious to me. Because look, we give these big corporations all of this wealth. We give them all of the tax breaks, as Dave said. And I'm glad to hear that the 1% that we give people for paying their taxes on time, I shouldn't say people, that we give huge corporations for paying their taxes on time now might be taken away. Because I don't get a pat on the back and owe a percent back. No, but Walmart does. And hopefully that goes away. But I was reading this Washington Post article that got me thinking about all of the money that we give to these big corporations. And evidently, you look at the South, and, we've talked about Tennessee and the Volkswagen plant, which now they're unionizing. Good for them. Going to make those decent, livable jobs and with good conditions and good wages and all of that stuff that comes with it. But if you remember, to get Volkswagen to come to Tennessee, the state of Tennessee actually had to fork over $1 billion in tax breaks and land grants and you name it, $1 billion. And, basically the Southern model of job creation is things are so desperate here that we're going to give you a boatload of the money that we would have spent on education so that you'll come and create low-paying jobs and you can exploit our workforce. That's the draw. And this Washington Post article was talking about this company, the Golden Dragon Precise Copper and Tube Group company there that came from China, built their little plant complete with a company town so they could bring all their Chinese workers who didn't speak English and put them there and let them work there as well. But they also created some local jobs. Like $11 an hour is what they threw out there. But what popped into my eyes that made me go, I know this moment. They were talking to one of the workers who thought this was going to be the greatest thing. He saw the ground being broken. He saw the buildings being built. And he said, this is going to be a great opportunity. I'm going to get a job. My life's going to get better. And he said, after all of these months of working for this place, what he's found is that his life's almost worse. His bank account is almost nothing. And he, on a regular basis, calls what he's titled as gas tank roulette. And all of us, I think, have played this at one time or another where, we're driving down the road and looking at that needle that's below E. And you can't get below empty, but there it is. And you're praying for that last mile to roll into the gas station before you run out of gas. I completely understand what this guy's talking about. And, he's saying, look, this is part of my normal life. Then I got to beg for my father to come and give me gas money so I can get home because payday isn't for another day or another couple of days. And, you look at the money and the model that we've set up in this country to where we're making sure that the well-heeled, because we're told they're the smart people, right? They know how to do things. And they do. They know how to make money for themselves. I don't know that this scheme that we've allowed to be developed around us is actually helping us. Because what's happening is, sure, you're building manufacturing capacity, you're building jobs in these really desperate areas, but it's not making people's lives better. And that's what a job is supposed to do. Maybe I'm the one who doesn't quite get it, but I'm of the mindset that a job makes your life better. The harder you work, the more you get ahead, all of that stuff. Play by the rules, la, la, la. But there are conservatives who keep telling me, no. We need to go to these third world countries and set up sweatshops where people work 15, 18, 20 hours a day. And maybe we can do that to the South because, things will be better. Because without those sweatshop jobs, they would be starving. And I'm just kind of going, no, I don't buy it. Because by doing this, by having this kind of scenario where you have exploited workers in this country especially, you're pulling everybody down. And I don't know that that's such a good idea. So I look at this story and it's, just one of those moments where you go, a lot of tax dollars have been just given to these companies for what? For the hope that they're going to create jobs. And then you find out, and this is what blew me away about this Golden Dragon company, is that, they're bringing in tons of foreign workers under the HB1 visas and all of this stuff to work in these plants. And they have little company towns. It's almost like an invasion of our manufacturing base. So it's just, to me, one of those things that I would like to see looked at on our budget level here as well. What kind of benefits are we giving these companies? I can point to a number of stories where, we gave money to a company in New Jersey to move across the river. No new jobs were created. It was just a reshuffling of people, but they moved their plant across the river. And we gave them I think it was like $76 million just to move. What benefit is that? And the answer is not much at all that I can see. Quick break, right back.
Red roses too. I see them blue on me and you, and I say to myself, what a wonderful world.
Yes, it is all about the children, even after they're born. Rick Smith.
Memo to future presidential candidates from Ted Cruz. 1, if you're going to issue an autobiography to promote your campaign, and 2, if your book highlights your father's heroic adventures in the 1950s Cuban Revolution as a testament to your own values and courage, and 3, if you're going to grandiosely title your book A Time for Truth, you really need to fact-check your father's old war stories, because if you don't, some snooping reporter will. Indeed, Jason Horowitz of the New York Times interviewed dozens of Cuba's revolutionary veterans and some childhood friends of Ted's father, Rafael. Turns out, Daddy was more of a fibber than a fighter. For example, in his frequent speeches for his son's campaign, Rafael enthralls Republican audiences with a vivid recounting of being a rebel combatant in the watershed Battle of Santiago, led by revolutionary hero Frank Pais. I knew Frank Pais personally, the elder Cruz says in his speeches. I saw him 12 hours before he was killed. Ted includes this dramatic moment in A Time for Truth, but there's no truth to it. Pais was not killed in that battle or in Santiago. He was executed elsewhere 7 months later by the Cuban dictatorship, and none of the veterans remember Rafael Cruz at all, nor could Rafael provide a single name to the times of the rebel comrades he claims to have fought beside. Also, Ted's book hails his father as a rebel saboteur, and Rafael's speeches are laced with flashy reminiscences of gun running and throwing Molotov cocktails. Again, though, when pressed by the Times, the yarn spinner could not come up with any specific acts of sabotage he performed or recall any targets of his cocktail tossings. This is Jim Hightower saying, no wonder Ted is infamous as a prevaricator, con artist, and outright liar. He's a chip off the old block.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
The man who sends the investor class diving through their tax shelters. Rick Smith.
At every trough you stop to feed. With your arrogance, your ignorance and greed. Now here come the cuts and redundancy. Through the absolute indifference, the avarice, incompetence, your arrogance, your ignorance, your greed.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So did you catch the president's speech last night? Well, the Republicans all in a tizzy. Also, I still can't get over the people trying to compare what happened in California to Pearl Harbor. Just kind of blows my mind. Anyway, let's find out what's going on around the world and in Washington, D.C. Justin Duckham, senior White House correspondent for Talk Media News Service. Justin, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, great to be here. And, just with the forefront of Pearl Harbor, I really just got to say, as much as I like FDR, I think one of his key mistakes was not describing that attack as an attack of Islamic terror.
I'm with you 100%, Justin. He should have had the vision and foresight.
I mean, it's radicalization, but he should have certainly mentioned Islam in that speech when he said it was the day of infamy.
Islamo-fascist.
Because of Islam or whatnot.
Islamo-fascist. You got to get it right.
Islamo-fascism, yes.
Speaking of that, I haven't heard Rick Santorum's name banged around in this. I would have thought this would have been a great opportunity for him to gain like a tenth of a percentage point.
What, really? I mean, come on. I mean, there's so many other demagogues on the issue right now that I don't necessarily think Rick Santorum's going to say anything particularly new when it comes to this situation right now. So I'm sure he probably has come up saying the usual kind of Rick Santorum-like stuff, but probably not anything that's going to necessarily put him ahead.
Yeah, his downfall was giving up the sweater vest.
Exactly, right. And also, we now have somebody like Donald Trump who's willing to make the really tough arguments that Rick Santorum probably would be a little bit afraid to, namely that the president calls them ISIS instead of ISIL, which of course was one of the huge, issues from last night that everyone's talking about today.
Yeah. Did he do it on purpose, or did he do it by accident, or did he do it because, as I would expect Bush to do, because he didn't know?
Well, I think he probably did it because that's how the State Department is describing ISIS right now. They typically refer to them as, ISIL. That's sort of the accepted, term used among his administration. But also it's worth noting that, the Pentagon as well uses the term ISIL on occasion, as well as Daesh, D-A-E-S-H, as another way to describe the Islamic State. Neither of them actually go forward with ISIS. So I guess Mr. Trump's critique was primarily that he just wasn't sounding like average Americans, even though, frankly, not even the AP uses ISIS anymore.
Yeah. Well, so let me ask you, what kind of response are you seeing in D.C. over the president's speech?
This was widely criticized as not really containing anything new. Primarily, there are people asking why exactly he had an Oval Office speech, wherein he wasn't really announcing any major foreign policy changes to how his administration is carrying on with this. But
so
primarily,
hold on. What would be the
White House
foreign policy changes? What are people saying we should be doing? Are they talking about let's send 100,000 troops or 200,000 troops to occupy? Is that what we should be doing?
Well, I mean, of course, there were, elements of that, floating around that's sort of coming from the Lindsey Grahams of the party, who really can't field a single question regarding anything without the response of, more troops. But, so primarily the White House is pushing back, saying this was a speech that Obama needed to give primarily in order to sort of, mitigate concerns that are going on right now. There's certainly a dense level of paranoia and sort of, mistrust that's taking place across the country. This was aimed at mending that. Whether or not he's really going to be able to give any kind of speech that's going to get rid of those concerns, that remains to be seen. But primarily here in D.C., it's been pretty widely panned from, the establishment media as well as the Republican Party, and not really too many vocal defenders on the Democratic side of things.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of this, if I were the president's advisor, I'd tell him to go out and give a speech tomorrow night too.
Yeah, I mean, that would certainly make sense. This is something wherein there are a lot of people who are, feeling pretty anxious. I don't think he's completed the goals of making them feel more safe. And, of course, a lot of people immediately tuned it out as soon as he, mentioned gun control beyond just the terror watch list. That's something that, of course, makes sense from the national security level and from the level of, being an average American who doesn't want to be shot in the next mass shooting. But nevertheless, it's sort of a dog whistle that gives a huge swath of Americans permission to essentially tune out any other message.
Yeah, well, I mean, nothing policy-wise is going to get done. That's going to be something maybe the next administration picks up, or who knows, till 2020 or 2022 when sanity might be restored to our government. I don't know. Let's move on.
I mean, there's not going to be any movement in terms of the gun control for people who are on the terror watch list. That's already been sort of X'd out by the Republican Party. And we're probably also not going to see an authorization for the use of military force. Not that would really do anything in the first place. The administration has already said that they believe they have the authority to carry out military action under existing AAU laws that was passed after 9/11. And essentially, this is just a way to try to get Congress's fingerprints on this as well, so that it's not a war entirely owned by the administration. And, as you would probably be able to imagine, going into an election year, there's not a lot of members who necessarily want to be castigated down the road for a, pretty controversial vote that isn't really going to affect anything anyways.
Yeah, good point. So are we shutting the government down?
That's what it certainly looks like right now. We have Paul Ryan saying essentially that Congress is not going to be able to complete everything before the end of December. We have the December 11th deadline for a government shutdown looming far overhead, but there's apparently still, quite a few issues that the GOP wants to take on, which means that we're probably going to be here up until the deadline before Christmas. And of course, these include such noble ambitions as, codifying the language to restrict the entrance of Syrian refugees and whatnot, as well as some additional deregulatory reforms, which, Paul Ryan seems pretty adamant about keeping Congress in to complete. But in terms of the pressing issue, it doesn't necessarily look like we have a way forward to avoid a government shutdown. Although the administration has said last time around that they are not going to be accepting any temporary measures, I wouldn't necessarily be surprised to see yet another instance of the can being kicked down the road, to use the now infamous cliche over here.
I mean, at this point, if I'm Obama, I take the hard line road. What has he got to lose? I mean, he's not standing for re-election. Stand for something. We've let them get away with this stuff for so long. At some point, you've got to smack them down, or play this out. You can't continue to have.
If we're just doing it for optics, if we're just doing it to show the GOP a lesson, then frankly, I don't think you'd be any better than Ted Cruz, who shut the government down to essentially show Republicans and Democrats a lesson as well. This is something that has realistic consequences, not just with the people who rely on salary from the federal government, or service voters who are relying on their benefits from the federal government, who are going to be losing them if it shuts down, but also with the larger economy of the U.S. at large. This is something that has pretty serious world consequences, and when it comes to cutting a temporary deal and being a wuss around Republicans, I would absolutely favor that, as opposed to a massive government shutdown like we saw in 2013.
Now, I understand that, but at the end of the day, if you're dying of the death of thousands and thousands of cuts, at some point, you have to take a stand?
I think you certainly, I think there's a case for that, but at the same time, when the stand could jeopardize a lot of people, that's a hard question, and that's, I guess that brings questions into, individual leadership styles. That's the decision, however, that I, personally, I'm glad I don't have to make.
No, well, I'm with you on that mostly, but the reality is we don't. I don't think either one of us buy into the scorched earth mentality. But you're dealing with people who do, and I look at what Ryan's inherited. I thought there was a deal. I thought there was some stuff worked out that would help move us past that a little bit, at least through the end of Obama's term. But now we're seeing real quickly that agreement that they made doesn't seem to be holding anything.
No, I mean that's certainly true. But at the same time, at this point, there's not really much the administration can do except take a temporary deal if one presents itself. If they veto a temporary deal, they're going to end up having this be on the backs of Democrats come the election year. Just to kind of put it in crass terms like that. That's something that I don't think anybody would necessarily like to see. And when it comes to making a deal down the road, I guess I'd be fine with serious. I guess probably a lot of Democrats would be fine with temporary measures until the next president comes into place, and then they can let Clinton or President Rubio or whoever take on a longer term spending agreement.
Or maybe President Cruz. Am I getting this right? Cruz is up in Iowa?
He certainly is. He's right now leading the field according to a Monmouth University poll at around 24%. He is leading Donald Trump, who comes in second, as well as Marco Rubio, who's taking a third place spot. A very interesting poll, one that shows a huge sort of amount of momentum for Ted Cruz going into the early days of the Iowa caucus, one that's probably going to be harped on for quite some time, but one we could also probably take a lesson in, considering we've seen a number of people take the top spot in Iowa before seeing Donald Trump sort of regain his position there. So, we'll see if this actually has staying power. There's a lot of discussion about Ben Carson. Once Ben Carson started to do pretty well in the state, before that it was Scott Walker, and with both of those candidates, we know that they didn't necessarily stay around very long as the anti-establishment candidates.
Yeah, and wasn't it in 2012? Didn't Michelle Bachmann win the Iowa caucus in 2012?
She won the Ames Iowa straw poll.
Okay, that's what it
2012, was. The lead up to the Iowa caucuses. That was a pretty remarkable chain of events. And then when it came to the actual Republican caucuses, I believe she finished pretty close to dead last.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, because I like Michelle. I love me some crazy.
No, she was the gift that kept on giving, and she sorely missed on Capitol Hill, I'm sure, from people in our circles.
I know I greatly miss her, but Justin, I appreciate the updates and the thoughts. Thanks so much.
Thank you. You have a good one.
Great talking with you, Justin Duckham, senior White House correspondent, Talk Media News Service. And I look at this and I got to tell you, I miss Michelle. I wish she was in this whole this presidential race. I wish that when we go to New Hampshire in February, I wish she was there. And maybe she will be. Who knows? I guess she still needs a job, right? Anyway, we're going to take a quick break. If you missed any portion of the program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go get the podcast, the Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Get the app. The great thing about it, holidays here, and it's free. And what's better than that? Also, you can email me, Rick at thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back. Stick around.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham.
Just very, very relieved and thankful and proud of everybody that helped us get to this point. They have done something big. They've done something historic. They've made history.
UAW Local 42 President Mike Cantrell reacting to the UAW winning a skilled trades worker NLRB election at VW's Chattanooga, Tennessee plant. Cantrell says the UAW will immediately start talking with VW about a collective bargaining agreement, the first for the UAW in a foreign-owned auto plant in the U.S.
If we can go to the table and get a good contract for the skilled trade workers, to me, I think it could only seem positive for the rest of the group of Local 42 production workers if they see how important it is to have a union.
71% of the skilled trades workers voted for the UAW. 2,200 United Steelworkers members at ATI, locked out since August 15th, are standing strong. USW Local 1196 President Fran Arabia.
They're very angry that this company we work for is doing this to us. The only thing our union has asked for is a fair contract. That's it. We're not asking for anything above and beyond, into the stratosphere of craziness. We're just asking to sit down and let's look at it logically. And that's all we've asked. And unfortunately, the company has taken this other approach where they're trying to break us, is what they're trying to do. We're going to get through this. And in my opinion, when the smoke clears, we're going to come back stronger than we ever were, because now people that never understood what a union means and what a union can do for you, they'll understand it when we get back to work.
This is Mitch Lawrence with a Sports Minute for Workers Independent News. Charles Barkley, the noted basketball expert, had one of the great lines when explaining why the game's greatest players are doomed to go out with a whimper rather than a bang. You can't beat Father Time, Barkley once observed. Then he added, Father Time is undefeated. But we're seeing that now with what is happening to three of the all-time greats in sports history, with basketball's Kobe Bryant, football's Peyton Manning, and golf's Tiger Woods. Bryant recently announced that he's retiring at the end of his 20th season with the Lakers. He might only be 37 years old, but for a wing player to play in the NBA as long as he has, he's the exception to the rule. He's been beset by major injuries the last couple of seasons, and you just wonder if his body can hold up for one more season. Manning, the Broncos Hall of Fame quarterback, isn't even playing these days after suffering a major foot injury. But even before he injured his foot, his play had dropped off to an all-time low, and it looked as if he should just retire. Then there's Woods, more famous than the other two when he was busy dominating professional golf by reeling off wins in the four majors faster than anyone could believe. But he too has been beset by back problems in recent years, and now he's just a shell of the player he once was. The same can be said of Bryant and Manning, who are also losing to Father Time.
Brought to you by the IBEW, 750,000 men and women powering the way for an American comeback.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
The proud defender of the American dream, Rick Smith. Call me the American nightmare. Call me the American dream. Call me your sovereign king. Call me anything you need.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So the question that I have, you hear a lot about the gun stuff, and do guns actually make you safer? And the answer, overwhelmingly, when you look at the studies, no. In fact, having a gun in the house means chances are someone's going to get shot, and it could probably be you. I remember when I first moved to Pennsylvania, and this is one of those culture shock things. Now, understand, in my years living here, and I moved to Pennsylvania in 93, I I understand the difference. Where I grew up, if you saw someone walking down the street with a gun, chances are they were going to shoot somebody. I've seen people shot. It is not pretty. And it's not like on TV where you go, oh, and then you fall down and die. No, there's a lot of screaming and pain and all of that stuff that goes along with it. Unless, of course, it's the heart shot that I saw the guy in Rhode Island take. He just kind of went down, and you saw the air bubbling out of his chest. But that's a whole graphic thing that I probably don't need to go into. But you look at this, and I keep hearing this frame, and it's the NRA who pushes this. The only a good guy with a gun could stop all that stuff, and we can stop rapes and abuse if women had guns. And when you look at the facts, you look at the details, you look at the reality. Chances are the gun makes everything worse. And I just saw this article at The Guardian. That kind of went into all of this stuff and gave the numbers, if you're into numbers, that the chances of, someone, who has a gun, they're about 4.5 times more likely to be shot than those people who don't carry a gun, even in crime situations, because the gun makes it worse. Part of it being that someone takes the gun away from you and uses it on you. When I was just out of college, I did a private police course, where in Ohio, to be a rent-a-cop carrying a gun, you had to do 120 hours of private police training. Because at one point I had this thought that I wanted to be a cop, and then I quickly changed my mind. But I remember something that just jumped right out, that 1/3 of all police killings are with their own guns. That policemen killed on the job, 1/3 of the time they're killed with their own guns. And I was going, wow, how's that possible? And it's there. And so you get the wrestling thing going on, the thing comes on clip. Now somebody else has got the gun. The same thing, people breaking into your house, same thing, confrontations in public. You get people who make decisions because they're emboldened by having the gun, according to reports. And, this isn't me making this stuff up. It makes sense to me that you would get some crazy guy who goes, I got a gun, I'm going to intervene in a situation, and I'll be the hero. Only to have the gun taken from them and they get shot, which there was part of me that says, okay, this is how we thin the herd. The problem is these crazy people seem to now be the loudest voices. The ones, because look, I'm not against two people shooting each other in an alley. You want to get into a fight, instead of throwing fists, you want to shoot at each other, great. Just as long as you hit each other, don't hit me. And that's my problem with all of this saturation of guns. The idea that if we had more guns, we'd be safer is ludicrous. You look at countries that have taken guns and had done a much better job of controlling them, not as many gun deaths. Kind of makes sense. Kind of makes perfect sense. Less guns, less gun deaths. Now, do they kill people in other ways? Sure. If I'm motivated enough to want to kill you, I will find another way. It'll be a lot more difficult, but I'm going to have to really want to do it. So to me, the gun is one of those things we should be looking at. And I find it really very interesting that today Clarence Thomas handed down his opinion on this case that the Supreme Court's not going to take up. And fortunately, they're not going to take up. The community had passed a law. Highland Park, Illinois, had passed an ordinance that bans manufacturing, selling, giving, lending, acquiring, or possessing a number of different kinds of assault weapons. And, the manufacturers and a bunch of people took it to the Supreme Court to overturn it. The court is not going to overturn it. I guess it's going to stay right where it's at. But Clarence Thomas decided to jump into this by saying that he believes that it's unconstitutional and it's a violation of the Second Amendment, and that we should have more access to assault weapons. Now, he and Scalia were the only two who thought that that's what we should be doing, which means that, at least as crazy as our Supreme Court is, at least 7 of them on this issue, rational thought, maybe because they don't want to get shot either. And that's just one of those things that makes me, kind of scratch my head and go, policy-wise, nothing going to get done. Nothing at all. And it's the loudest voices who are screwing things up for everybody else. It's the NRA who has spent tons of money, not just buying special favors and not just lobbying and all of that stuff, but also doing grassroots mobilization of the I want to be saturated with guns folks who are the most vocal. And I spent a couple of hours last night while I was up at 3 o'clock in the morning trying to fall asleep. I'm reading, this is how screwed up I am. I'm reading a number of different studies that are pointing out some of the craziness and how many people have guns and what happens with it and the mentality that goes into it. They actually did a study that showed the testosterone level of somebody who is carrying a gun, that it actually goes up a little bit, which means that aggressiveness and all of the negative things with high testosterone levels are right there, which kind of makes sense. That the people who want to carry guns they're going to be your most wannabe macho kind of mentality, which is kind of scary because those are the last people I want armed. And it got me thinking last night too, and I forget what her first name was. I think it was Melanie Hahn, or it could be Megan. You may remember this woman. She was the NRA darling in Reading for about 6 seconds. If you remember, she was the woman who decided she wanted to carry her 9mm to her 6-year-old soccer game. And she wanted it out as a sidearm, and she wanted to show the world, I'm carrying my gun and don't mess with me because obviously I have a gun. And the sheriff in the county, kind of freaked, took the gun, and national outrage. All of the NRA types were just crazy. She was a media star for, like I said, about 6 seconds. And, the NRA came in with their lawyers, and there was all this stuff to make sure that she had her God-given right to have that 9mm. I think, and I said this when it happened, this is one of those cautionary tales. This is one of those scenarios where the gun's there. She's on the computer. This is how the story, as I remember it, went. She's on the computer doing some kind of work. She's got her sidearm right there behind her, hanging over the chair, on the chair that she's sitting on. When her boyfriend, husband, whatever he was, takes the gun out and shoots her in the head. Drops her dead right on her computer screen. And I go, it's kind of one of those, wow. Those stories that we should be going, that's kind of what happens. No gun, maybe the guy just hits her with a stick or something. And then she has a chance to get away. Walking up behind and being shot with your own gun, especially the gun that the NRA and the gun nut world said, no, you should have. There's part of me that goes, I'm betting her kids wish that she'd have lost that battle. And this is what scares me. The reason that, I didn't, I gave up the gun idea. I got small kids. The last thing I want is a gun in the house to go after the small kids. I'm not anti-gun, but I think about my small kids who at the time, who knows what they get into. That's the reality of our situation. And I know the argument. The criminals are always going to have guns. And you know where they get them most of the time? From the supposed good guy with the gun. They steal it, or I can get a gun almost anytime I want. And that's the sad part of this. And we're not doing any of the sane, rational things that even I, who I don't consider myself a gun grabber, would say is just rational. Background checks seem fairly rational. If your name is on the terror watch list, maybe we should, not give them a gun. And if you think your name is on that terror watch list improperly, there should be a method by which you're challenging that listing. And I think there should be anyway, if there's not already. And I think there is, but because I know Congressman John Lewis was on it and he got it off. At some point, do we not have to start thinking in those terms? People with mental illness, and I understand the mental illness advocates saying, well, now we're stigmatizing the mentally ill. And I get that. But you look at a lot of these shootings, the mass shootings going on, there's something there. But bigger than all of that, it's the saturation of guns everywhere. When I was a kid, you couldn't, getting a gun was damn hard. And if he got caught with one, it was trouble. Now we've got people walking around saying, I'm going to carry my gun out in public and I'm going to make a spectacle of myself. Like it's the Wild West that never was. And that's the thing that gets me. The Wild West wasn't as wild as we thought it was. Wyatt Earp, what do you think one of the first things Wyatt Earp did when he came to town? Banned guns. Why? He's the guy with the gun. That's the reality. A lot of these towns came together. Nope, we're not going to have this kind of craziness. No, gun-free zone. I kind of like the way we've rewritten kind of the Wild West, where there are gun shootouts all the time. It's kind of nuts. But I find it interesting. Thomas, the guy who wants more, we should have more. Just weird, nuts, crazy, sad. Love to hear your thoughts, questions, comments. Rick at thericksmithshow.com or give us a call, 1-888-520-RICK, 1-888-520-7425. More guns, less guns. What do we do with the guns? Should we give 6-year-olds guns? Should they have their starter gun? We'll find out. Right back. Stick around. Listen to the Rick Smith Show. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1931. That was the day that protesters staged a hunger march on Washington, D.C. 1,600 protesters took part in the march. Communist organizers helped to organize the protest. One of the demands of the march was unemployment insurance for workers who had lost their jobs. The country was in the throes of the Great Depression, caused by the stock market crash of 1929. Far too many people had seen their entire life savings wiped out by the crash and subsequent bank failures. Millions were out of work and families were losing their homes. There was a growing anger in the country over what was perceived as President Herbert Hoover's indifference and ineffectual dealing with the crisis. The media focused on the communist ties to the D.C. Hunger March, but the idea of the March on Washington grew. The next year, a Pittsburgh priest led an army of 12,000 jobless men to the Capitol to demand unemployment legislation. Then that May, a former cannery worker named Walter B. Walters organized World War I veterans to protest in D.C. They called themselves the Bonus Expeditionary Forces. They demanded early payment of a bonus that Congress had promised them for their service in World War I. The movement of working people grew as a weary and hungry nation demanded action from its elected leaders. As a result, Americans voted President Hoover out of office in the 1932 election. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected on a platform that the U.S. government should act to address the dire conditions of the millions of unemployed. Finally, in August 1935, President Roosevelt signed the Social Security Act into law. This act contained a provision for unemployment insurance. It was a major step towards establishing unemployment protections for workers in the United States.
Tales of American Political History with Clinton Porter Hackney.
On November 26, 1941, 6 Japanese aircraft carriers sailed from Japan to a position just northwest of the Hawaiian Islands. The carriers contained 408 airplanes, which were prepared to launch an air attack on the U.S. naval fleet at Pearl Harbor, along with other U.S. facilities and assets on the islands. The first wave of 183 planes dropped their first torpedoes at 7:48 a.m. Hawaiian time. The Americans woke to sounds of alarms, explosions, and gunfire. Ammunition lockers were locked, guns were unmanned, and airplanes were parked up against each other, preventing many takeoffs. The attack was over 90 minutes after it began. 2,403 Americans died. Though it has constantly been couched as a surprise attack, it was not much of a surprise at all. Being unprepared is not the same as being surprised. Join us again for the context of 1941. This is Clinton Porter Hackney at cphackney.com.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm going to this battle, take my Union gun. Gonna end this world of slavery, for this war is one you're bound to lose. You fascists, goodbye.
So good news coming out of Las Vegas. The Culinary Workers Union Local 226 put out a press release that the Trump Hotel there, Trump International Hotel, Las Vegas, the workers there have voted overwhelmingly to be represented by the Culinary Workers Local 226 and the Bartenders Union Local 165 of Unite Here. Over 500 employees at the hotel have voted for collective bargaining rights. Now, this is one of those things. Trump is in the spotlight, saying we're going to create good jobs, we're going to do all this stuff. And now he's got employees who are going, whoa, we need to sit down and talk about this. And I think this is a good thing. It's been interesting to me that now there have been a number of workers who see the opportunity to go after where they work to organize that Trump is a part of, that he's involved in this. Because just a couple of months ago, the Trump International Hotel in Toronto voted to unionize and also ratified their first contract. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there in Las Vegas. Now, it's not a casino hotel. It's a 5-star hotel. It's a beautiful hotel, and you give him credit. He's a co-owner with a casino magnate, and it'll be interesting to see what happens there. So good on the workers and good for them. Interesting story coming out of Con Energy. Their CEO of solar projects, this guy named Andrew DeBoss, he basically said, look, we've got Congress who can barely spell climate change, let alone do anything else. So there's not going to be any push for renewables. And what's going on right now, and I find this really kind of remarkable, because I saw this article in the Washington Post that basically said ExxonMobil, if you look at their website, that ExxonMobil has admitted climate change is real. It's happening. In fact, the Post did an interview with experts from Exxon, and they basically told the Post, look, if we don't do anything, temperatures are going to rise by 5 degrees Celsius, with 6, 7, or even higher, even possible. In fact, their word, quite possible. And what they're saying on their website is, look, or in their policy piece, is a properly designed carbon tax can be predictable, transparent, and comparatively simple to understand and implement. You've got ExxonMobil calling for a carbon tax. They're saying it would be the most sensible solution. It would be revenue neutral. It would tax oil, gas, coal. It would tax all of those things. And then, we would have a bunch of incentives for people to move to alternatives, kind of like Germany did about, 20 years ago now, to where they were paying people to put solar panels on their house, and the fossil fuel industries were paying higher costs to buy those credits. You look here in Pennsylvania, and one of the things that infuriates me about the short-sightedness of our General Assembly, they allowed the solar industry in Pennsylvania to basically die. There was a moment back, I guess it was about 3-4 years ago, where here in Pennsylvania, if you put solar panels on your house and you generated 1,000 kilowatt hours of electricity, you were given an energy credit, one of the solar renewable energy credits, the SRECs. And for those SRECs, the industry, the coal power fire plants, the fuel, ExxonMobil, your Excelsior, all of those people would buy those credits because there was a percentage of their portfolio they had to get from renewables, and that percentage they then paid back to people who put panels on their house. And back a couple of years ago, it was like $225 a credit, which was a pretty good incentive for people like me to put solar panels on their house. Almost immediately, as soon as our General Assembly and Tom Corbett decided it was a good idea to let that tank, it went from $225 down to $10 a credit. And that basically killed the entire industry, because it now makes it much more costly and a much longer payoff to return your investment in solar or geothermal or wind or any of those other things. So you've got ExxonMobil now saying, we need to do something on climate change. We need to do something or we're going to all be in serious trouble. What I find interesting is that the people who brought us this are the ones who are saying, please do something about it. Because it's not corporate America's job to be doing this stuff. It's regulators' job. It's our job. It's we the people's. It's the corporate, it's the government's job to regulate corporations. So when we do this and we allow these big companies to do whatever they want, with the idea, we'll clean it up later, or we'll just pass that down the road, you end up with a situation where now you've got the company going, hey, wait a minute. We're now looking at this. Our experts are looking at this, and it might really affect us. Please do something. And what we've got in Washington and here in Pennsylvania is real, absolute dysfunction, because the corporate money has grown so powerful. And this is a weird moment for me, because you look at ExxonMobil going, you got to do something. After years and years of denial, years and years in funding these denial scientists and being parts of the American Legislative Exchange Council and groups like that, whose their main focus is making sure none of those job-killing regulations get into law. And now you look back at this and you go, but I thought, the climate change was just a liberal conspiracy. No. They've known about this for years. And they really just thought that they could just continue to push it down the road. So I find it interesting, I guess, and I find it scary that ExxonMobil's the one out there saying, hey, do something. I guess I'm a little freaked out that the people who did it are now saying help. Because then you have to go, how bad is it really? I mean, honestly, if ExxonMobil is calling for something to be done, how bad is it really? How bad has it gotten? And that's the scary thing in all of this. What needs to happen is we need to have those SREC credits solidified. We need something. Be it a solar investment tax credit, be it the renewable energy tax credits, be it something to incentivize us to do what's in our best interests, not just financially, but as a planet. I don't care how we do it. Something's got to happen. Right now, and this is how I put panels on my house. The federal government gave 30% of the costs of a system. My system cost $20,000 to put on the house. The federal government picked up 30% of that. There was a little bit of money that came from the Sunshine Fund here in Pennsylvania because we had believed, hey, let's go in that direction. And then the credits, the SREC credits, were supposed to help shorten the time of payoff. When I sat down and figured it out at $200 a credit, it would take about 6 years. Now I'm looking at about 18 years to recoup my investment, which is fine. But it would have been better if it were just 6. This is what we've allowed to happen. And I consider this another one of those massive redistributions of wealth. But as of the end of next year, this solar investment tax credit that I was able to get is going to go away. And what it had done, like I said, 30% of not just mine on my house, but also commercial projects, which is why you see school districts like the one that my kids go to have massive solar arrays. Because the federal government was picking up 30% of the costs. Why you go past some of these fields where the farmers have put up these massive solar fields? Because there was an incentive to help them put those on their property and also use the stuff to run their farm. That's going to go away. And I guess at the end of 2016, so January 1st, 2017, that will drop down to just 10% for commercial projects, and residential will go away, which to me is going to kill the residential market even further. I mean, it's already dead here in Pennsylvania because of what the Republicans have done to the industry. But nationally, this credit was pretty substantial, and it's going to go away at the end of next year. I don't see any movement, any push, any will politically for the Republicans to take this up. I see this to be another one of those moments where we had really great ideas, we were moving in the right direction, and a Republican effed it up. It's that simple. You know, I hearken back to Ronald Reagan, who Jimmy Carter put the solar hot water panels on the White House. First thing Reagan does, rip them off. The interesting little tidbit about that system that he ripped off the White House, Carter put up, that Reagan took off, kind of as a signal to the Exxon Mobils and the fossil fuel industry of, we're going back to good old oil. The interesting part of those panels still in use today, up in New England somewhere. I think it's in New Hampshire. There's a small college there that solar hot water system is still heating hot water today. So it's that kind of investment that will pay dividends for years and years into the future. And I remember as a kid when Carter did that, going, wow, we can create energy from the sun. Wow, wow, mind blowing. That's the future. And what did Reagan do? He quashed all of that. I think we're at that moment again. I think you've got Republicans who again want to put us back into the dark ages. And to me, this is the time where we need to be saying, no, I think we should be going to something else, going a different direction, especially when Exxon Mobil is telling us climate change is real and it's going to be even more catastrophic than we even think it's going to be. Scary, scary times, my friends. Let's take a quick break. Right back. When we come back, Raging Chicken Press, going to find out what's going on in the Pashy schools here in Pennsylvania, especially around this insane budget impasse. Right back.
Floodgates are open. We've let the demons loose. The big guns have spoken. And we've fallen for the ruse.
There is this sort of unanimity of opinion that something has got to get done here.
Historic United Nations climate talks now underway in Paris.
Technology-driven advances are relentless. They're going to drive down costs, and they're basically going to make the cheapest thing to do the cleanest thing to do.
Governments and billionaires launch huge new investments in clean energy. Plus,
governments currently engaged in this round of climate talks will want to know that there is more than just an executive branch in our system of government.
Republicans working hard to undermine progress in any way they can.
All of that undermining and progress straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comments.
Well, the world is in turmoil and falling apart in so many different ways, especially with ISIS. Our president is worried about global warming. What a ridiculous situation.
And no one knows ridiculous situations better than you, Mr. Trump. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, it's quite remarkable. With so much going on in the news, it's easy to not even notice the fact that this historic climate change conference is now actually underway in Paris, as you have been waiting for and anticipating for so many months.
Oh, yeah. It's history being made in Paris right now at the Global Climate Talks. The nations of the world are now meeting in Paris for the 21st Conference of the Parties of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or COP21 for short. The goal is to complete a comprehensive international binding agreement for all nations to cut the greenhouse gas emissions that cause dangerous global warming in order to keep the planet's temperature from rising more than than 2 degrees Celsius over pre-industrial times.
Yeah, good luck with that.
I know. It's about 3.5 degrees Fahrenheit. Human activity has already raised temperatures by 1 degree Celsius. So, by the way, we are halfway there.
Just to clarify, halfway to the bad thing, not
Yes.
halfway to the good thing.
That's right. U.S. President Barack Obama opened the UN climate conference with an acknowledgement that developed countries like the U.S. bear responsibility to take action.
There is such a thing as being too late. And when it comes to climate change, that hour is almost upon us. I've come here personally as the leader of the world's largest economy and the second largest emitter to say that the United States of America not only recognizes our role in creating this problem, we embrace our responsibility to do something about it.
A successful global agreement includes transparent mechanisms for all countries to review their progress and ratchet up their targets as new technology becomes available. It includes measures to reduce deforestation and the biggest area of conflict, funding for developing nations so that they can prepare for climate change impacts and hopefully leapfrog over the pollution phase of development while still lifting their people out of poverty. And most importantly,
that it is an ambitious target that seeks a low carbon global economy over the course of this century.
in other words, phasing out fossil fuels completely. One thing the Paris conference will not do is solve climate change. National pledges to reduce emissions so far are not enough to stay below the key threshold of 2 degrees Celsius. So this is only the beginning. The talks create the architecture, the framework for the decades-long transition to a low-carbon and eventually zero-carbon economy. This is the first time all nations have agreed to do so. President Obama concluded his participation in Paris with a hopeful message.
I'm optimistic. I think we're going to solve it. I think the issue is just going to be the pace and how much damage is done before we are able to fully apply the brakes.
And so far, several major new financing programs have already been launched. The White House announced 2 sweeping initiatives. The U.S. and 20 developed nations will increase investment in clean energy research and development. A separate initiative headed by Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates will mobilize $20 billion in private venture capital investment. And India announced a new global solar energy partnership with 121 developing countries. But here in the U.S., congressional Republicans still trying to undermine President Obama in Paris.
No.
This week passing 2 new resolutions to overturn Obama's landmark new emission standards for power plants, even though the White House will veto the legislation. They said it's to send a message to the world community that the U.S. might not abide by any agreement.
And to send a message that they don't like this planet really at all. They have no interest in keeping it livable, apparently.
Yet the Republicans are out of step with Americans. A new New York Times CBS poll this week finds 2/3 of Americans want the U.S. to sign on to the UN agreement.
For much more on the stories we covered today, including COP21, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us and follow us on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Organizing America 3 hours each night. The Rick Smith Show.
I tip my hat to the new Constitution. Take a bow for the new revolution. Sliding free with the change all around. Pick up my guitar and bass. Just like yesterday. Then I'll get on my knees and pray. We don't get fooled again.
Well, and looking over what's being leaked out, what's being put out over the budget, hopefully we don't get fooled again. I know over the weekend there was talk that, we got something down. Then Saturday night, I guess it all fell apart. I guess our senators don't like working weekends. But as I understand, something in the works Will it be done by big party time come Friday? Will the gals get to go to the ball? Will Stephen Bloom get to take his... not going there. Going to move on. Here to talk about what's going on with the budget, how painful it has been, and what things are going on with our state system of higher education. Kevin Mahoney, editor zero over at Raging Chicken Press. Kevin, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, all right, Rick. Good to talk to you, and it's especially on this crazy Monday. I'll tell you that.
It is crazy. I mean, the news over the weekend was, they're working. There was some talk of, hey, maybe something might get done, and all of a sudden, everything, no, nothing's going to get done. And now, 43-7 vote in the Senate, even though the House probably not going to go along. It is crazy.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, I see. This all comes in the middle of what started leaking out. Actually, on Raging Chicken, Sean Kitchen got the word that there was this internal squabble or schism in the House leadership between Mike Turzai and David Reed, which seemed to contribute to the overall chaos in the House over the weekend. And it's been kind of funny. And now even Penn Live is picking up on that as one of the potential squabbles that's going on. And now we've got the House looking like they're trying their best, at least, to scuttle this deal that Wolf was able to reach with the PA Senate. So we're looking at the House putting forward the budget that's looking for $150 million in education funding, as opposed to $350 million that was proposed in the Senate. The House is proposing $215 million less in basic education, $25 million less in pre-K, $5 million less in Head Start, $20 million less in special ed, and it wants to maintain the corporate cuts in all human services. And then what they're going to do, of course, they're going to put it on the back of sales tax, the sales tax, which is already, as you know, disproportionately hits those folks in need already. So it's really unclear what the heck they're doing here. Is this just a bunch of posturing while they get their own house in order and figure out who's their actual leader? But right now, it seems like you got a bunch of folks in the GOP sitting there in the House like chickens with their heads cut off, running around the Capitol.
I think most people realize that Turzai is kind of the fly in the ointment.
Yeah.
Especially when you look at the wine and spirit fetish that he has, that we have to privatize the liquor stores. I mean, that seems to be his single-minded sole focus.
Yeah, that's what it seems like. And it's, at least like according to some of the talk that's been going on in the Capitol apparently over the weekend, it became more and more publicly spoken that Turzai is, he's just leading everyone down a path of destruction, that he really needs to get out of here, that he doesn't really he's not just cut out for any kind of leadership whatsoever. And while Reed is not exactly someone you could imagine supporting, I mean, the guy's, he's right wing, he's part of that kind of that move towards the right that's taken place in the PA House. But apparently he's kind of more in the camp of trying to get something done, even if it's not that great by our standards. And so, we'll see what happens at the end of that. So who knows what's going to happen between those two. It'd be great if we just put up a ring in the center of the Capitol, let them duke it out so we can get this done.
Yeah, that would be interesting to watch. Maybe put it up for pay-per-view and fund education.
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be great. It's funny because we see all this move that's taken place in the reporting on this budget, and it just gives me a sense of how bad our situation is in governance in Pennsylvania. I mean, the fact is that when you have people like the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center and Senator Hughes and even Wolf himself coming out and basically trying to lay claim that the Senate compromise is actually a victory, you can imagine what a defeat would look like. Because this victory is really no good for the bulk of us. I mean, yes, we're going to get a little bit back from the corporate cuts in education, but it's nowhere near to getting us back to where we need to be. I mean, after the successive years of billion-dollar cuts that we saw to education, the same is true at the higher ed level. I mean, it's pretty amazing. I mean, I was looking at Senator Hughes sent out a tweet today, saying, look at this historic budget compromise of $400 million, increase of education. Yeah, but that's after billions of dollars of cuts.
Exactly.
And I remember you had Erwin Aronson on last week, and he was kind of talking about this as just basically, it barely meets what Pennsylvania school district lost in charter payouts this past year. So we're talking about yes, it's an improvement over where we stand right now, and it's going to ease a little bit of the suffering. But I'm almost ready to say, okay, let's get this done and let's move on so we can get to the next budget, which is due in 2 months.
Yeah, and that's the thing that's kind of frightening. But I look at, let's say this falls through.
Yeah.
There have got to be contingency plans, and I look at the Pesci school system. They're heavily dependent on funding from the state. What happens if we don't get a budget? Are we seeing universities closing? Are we seeing schools shutting their doors? What are we seeing?
Well, that just might be. I mean, just let's take this back a little bit. Remember when Tom Wolf came in, his initial budget and the proposal was his initial budget, everything was balanced. Right, he had the revenues to pay for all of his proposals. We saw the severance tax on the drillers. We saw that there was property tax relief, and everything was a sound budget. This was just as I remember you saying on the show. There's a guy who's coming in and he's acting like a businessman, like doing what he did in his company. He's saying, okay, let's make sure we got everything paid for. There's no gimmicks here. Everything's out on the table. And back in that part of his budget proposal, he wanted to say, okay, we're going to put back half of the money that was cut to the state system of higher education, of PASHE, on the condition that tuition would not be raised for students, right? And that was sensible, right? It's basically saying, look, you don't want to kind of increase the cost to students, and we're going to hold that down. And then we're also going to make sure we start building that funding back up. Well, because the budget deal fell through, right? Because you got the chaos in Harrisburg that is the PAGOP. Basically, what happened is that PASHE had to start paying its bills. So what we saw is a 3.5% increase in tuition of students, which it should have been zero. So you have already got a 3.5% increase in tuition on students' backs. Now what's happening is because the state system doesn't know what its funding is going to look like, right? Not only is that holding up negotiations with faculty in our faculty contract, but what also happening now, some proposals that seem to be dead are now coming back, and those are these pay per credit tuition schemes, which will basically drive up tuition costs. So I know they're reconsidering this at Kutztown University. I'm sure that Bloomsburg was on the verge of instituting this. I'm sure that they're going to go back to this. And so you're talking about an increase in tuition for students taking the normal course load of 15 credit hours, 18 to 23%. So that's like a historic increase in tuitions. And my concern is that, here we sit, given all the chaos of the discussion around this particular budget, these are the kind of proposals that could easily slip in with very few people noticing. Because what's going to happen as soon as we do get a budget, right, or we move into the new year, all the talk is going to start shifting towards, number one, the next budget, right, and number two, the 2016 election period.
And going back to this paper credit thing, I mean, most of us who have gone to college in years past, you go in, you pay a certain rate, up to 12 credits, and anything you take over that seemed to be almost a bonus. So the incentive to me, when I was in school, was take additional credits so that maybe you get out a little bit earlier, or maybe even, who knows, on time. Now you're talking about making that a penalizing people who want to do that.
Absolutely, because everyone knows one of the things that you happen in terms of your the funding towards schools, and one of the things that universities are measured by is your graduation rate, right? So in order to graduate in 4 years, you have to take an average of 15 credit hours per semester, right? So that if if a student looks at that and says, hey, look, I can save some money by only taking 12 credit hours per semester. Well, guess what? That adds time towards graduation, and it turns out that it actually ends up costing them more in the long run because they're forced to be at campus for at least another semester, if not two. Right? So they end up paying more in the long run, but even though it seems in the short run that they're paying less. And the other idea is too, is one of the biggest assets for students, especially in a competitive job market, is the ability not only just to get a degree in a particular area, but is also to pick up minors along the way, right? That will kind of augment what they're doing. So, for example, and if I'm someone who's in sociology, but I'm interested in kind of politics, or I'm interested in writing, I might pick up a minor in professional writing, or I might pick up a minor in political science, right? As a way to kind of expanding what, my list of, my CV and stuff, my resume, and learning more in those areas that I'm really interested in. And then this is going to kind of really cause some students to second guess that, right? To say, can I really afford to do that? Which, of course, in the long run, it's only to their benefit to take those minors, especially when they can accomplish that within a 4-year degree. But here, if they're thinking about counting credit hours, it can dissuade them from doing that, and that's actually going to hurt them in the long run.
Yeah.
So we get a kind of a double whammy against students, right? Everybody wants to start looking towards this immediate, right in front of you this semester, what's your tuition bill look like, as opposed to looking at your overall education. And, if we go down that road, and Millersville has already gone down that road, we go down that road, right? We're basically saying it's okay to shift the cost onto the backs of students and their parents, right? And this is no longer a public institution, a public right that we're willing to invest in. It's everyone on their own.
It just seems to me it's more commodifying education, to where now it's it's like buying apples and oranges now, instead of training the next generation of workforce and of citizens. It's now, I'm only going to get what I need and then get out. It just seems to be kind of short-sighted to me.
It really is, Rick. And I think that, it's short-sighted on two ways. And what you're getting shortchanged is students thinking about, you're going to churn them through and get these degrees on this kind of assembly line. And then on the other hand, we're kind of like deprofessionalizing the faculty, or they're attempting to deprofessionalize the faculty, so that, students are not guaranteed to have a professor that's been working here for a long period of time. I mean, one of the holdups, in addition to all the chaos that is the PA budget that's going on, one of the holdups in our own negotiation with ABSCUF's negotiation with the state system of higher education is, once again, that these folks want to turn a good portion of our faculty member into kind of piecework faculty, into the adjunct model where people are just working course per course. There's no opportunity for advancement. There's no job security. There's no benefits. And that's just a model that has proven time and time again to do nothing to detract away from the quality of education. And ABSCUF has held that line to say, look, we want our temporary faculty members, those faculty members who are here, they're not on a tenure track basis, but to have some degree of job security. If they do a great job, that we have a process to convert them into a tenure track job. And the idea is that you want to have that kind of stability to ensure that those faculty are here from semester to semester. So when students need recommendations, when they need advice, when they want to take a second course with that faculty member because it was so great, they have that opportunity. And that's the kind of thing we should be investing in.
Yeah, I mean, the stability. I mean, that to me, that's a key part of the whole system. If you don't have that, then what do you have?
No, that's absolutely right. This is something that when I used to work at George Washington University in DC, I was there as an adjunct. I was getting paid $1,500 per class with no job security, no benefits whatsoever. And this is in DC, one of the high cost regions of the country, one of the highest cost regions of the country.
That'll buy you a nice cardboard box for under the bridge.
Yeah, exactly, right. And the thing was that I have all these students who would come up and say, "Are you going to be here next semester?" And I say, "I don't know." And then sometimes I would get emails, and I would get them late, right? Because I'm, now I don't, my email is shut off until I get a new contract, where they need a recommendation from me, right? Because I'm the only faculty member who knows them, because I'm teaching that first year course, right? And if that faculty member's not there, again, that student loses that opportunity.
It just seems to me that we're heading down that rabbit hole to where, everything that was part of the commons, part of the fabric of this country, just being ripped away and privatized and just put on the chopping block to the lowest bidder.
Yeah, that's really true. And I think, and this is something, again, you could track the last years of your show, right? As, show after show after show. I mean, what you've been doing, right, is documenting this process, right? And sending up flags and fireworks and flares all along the way to point to the fact that, look, this is kind of what's happening to our commons. Right. And it's such a great record of, and I hate to say that, because who wants to have to document this stuff? But frankly, that's the context in which we live. And, I'm hoping, and I get the why we get folks from the progressive ends kind of coming out wanting to push this budget forward. But I worry about some of the language that we get when we start talking about a historic increase to education and this being a big victory, right? Because really, we're talking lowest common denominator at this point.
Yeah. And
I'm really hoping that people aren't just going to turn around and go home, but then we start turning immediately into looking forward to the 2016 election. because I think that we had a historic win when we saw the judges that were elected in this past fall's election. That was incredible. So that was a huge victory to ensure that our Pennsylvania Supreme Court and Commonwealth Court is not going to be dominated by these right-wing nut jobs, right? But now we have to do our job, kind of looking forward to 2016, and put the pressure on these folks. We're seeing right now who's holding up this process. We got to ensure that those folks are booted, because we can't keep this going on. And because if we do, there's nothing but gloom in our future.
Yeah, one of them being at least Mike Turzai.
Yeah, he's got to go.
I mean, at some point, his constituents have got to be going, what are you doing?
Well, I look at it like this, Rick. I look at it at some level, that very base level of like, when you get that neighbor that, you're good friends, you hang out a lot, but at some point that, and they're a little bit embarrassing, but there's a tipping point where you're just like, look, this guy's too embarrassing to have around. Right. At some point, you got to have your own sense of kind of self-respect and dignity to say, look, well, I'm sorry. Look, I know you were our guy, but you got to go, because you can't be saying these things and representing us at the same time.
Yeah.
I would think that dignity factor would kick in at some point to get that guy out.
Yeah, I'm thinking immediately. I'm thinking of my neighbor who had the cannon in his living room.
Yeah.
That's one of those moments.
And he's gone now, right?
Yeah, thank goodness. And
See that?
my neighbors behind me now are just fabulous, terrific people, and I don't have to worry about Mr. Deliverance coming after me in the middle of the night with his cannon. So, last line of questioning I've got for you, then, because this budget's kind of held everything up with the contract that the APSCUF members are looking for, and that you're trying to hammer out. How has this held this up? And once it happens, aren't you going to be kind of in the same boat, because it's already back to going after the next budget?
Yeah, that's right. And I think that what we're seeing interesting in these negotiations is that the line is the same line that we've seen before. That even though there's been a switch at the top in the governor's mansion, we're still seeing the same kind of approach of the austerity approach when it comes to the state system of higher education. So I think a couple things are going to have to happen at this point. I mean, once this gets settled, then we're just going to have to start ramping up the pressure as faculty to start kind of showing up and start kind of saying, look, it's time that we're going to stand up for our students. I mean, I think so much energy has been put into this budget process right now that we've been hopeful, I think, as a union that, we're going to be able to kind of get it past us and then actually sit down and have some real agreements. But that doesn't seem like they want to play in that way. They've already done stuff, the state system of higher education, they've already done things like put contract proposals that have come out in the negotiating process up on their webpage, which is basically the mirror of the legislation that a lot of the kind of right to work nut jobs, those want to kind of gut collective bargaining rights in the state. They're proposing that as legislation, and we've got the chancellor of the state system of higher education basically one-upping them and just doing it without even asking and pretending and being, playing dumb, like, oh, I didn't know there was that kind of legislation. And let's remember, this is the guy who was Jeb Bush's number 2 down in Florida. This guy is no fool. I mean, he knows exactly what he's doing.
He's part of the education privatization cabal. He's in the game.
That's right. That's exactly what it is. So, I think it's going to be time to, put the feet on the ground and start getting the boots out marching and start showing up and kind of demanding that, we're going to defend this institution with everything we got.
Now, I mean, because as I've been saying for a while, this is the jewel of Pennsylvania. It's something that we should be defending at all costs. And as you guys continue your contract talks, we'd love to have you back and talk about that and how we can get the message out.
You got it, Rick. I'll be here.
Kevin, always great talking with you. I appreciate the time, man.
All right. We'll talk to you soon.
Kevin Mahoney, editor Zero Raging Chicken Press. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Memo to future presidential candidates from Ted Cruz. 1, if you're going to issue an autobiography to promote your campaign, and 2, if your book highlights your father's heroic adventures in the 1950s Cuban Revolution as a testament to your own values and courage, and 3, if you're going to grandiosely title your book A Time for Truth, you really need to fact-check your father's old war stories, because if you don't, some snooping reporter will. Indeed, Jason Horowitz of the New York Times interviewed dozens of Cuba's revolutionary veterans and some childhood friends of Ted's father, Rafael. Turns out, Daddy was more of a fibber than a fighter. For example, in his frequent speeches for his son's campaign, Raphael enthralls Republican audiences with a vivid recounting of being a rebel combatant in the watershed Battle of Santiago, led by revolutionary hero Frank Pais. I knew Frank Pais personally, the elder Cruz says in his speeches. I saw him 12 hours before he was killed. Ted includes this dramatic moment in A Time for Truth, but there's no truth to it. Pais was not killed in that battle or in Santiago. He was executed elsewhere 7 months later by the Cuban dictatorship. And none of the veterans remember Rafael Cruz at all, nor could Rafael provide a single name to the times of the rebel comrades he claims to have fought beside. Also, Ted's book hails his father as a rebel saboteur, and Raphael's speeches are laced with flashy reminiscences of gun running and throwing Molotov cocktails. Again, though, when pressed by the Times, the yarn spinner could not come up with any specific acts of sabotage he performed or recall any targets of his cocktail tossings. This is Jim Hightower saying, no wonder Ted is infamous as a prevaricator, con artist, and outright liar. He's a chip off the old block.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
Would you dive 14 feet deep in the Susquehanna to keep a bridge safe? Would you spend night after night with prisoners to keep your community safe? Would you spend Christmas Eve plowing snow to keep roads safe? AFSCME members do. Men and women who choose to serve in public service. Mine inspectors, 911 dispatchers, healthcare workers, parole agents. You may not think about them, but no, they're all thinking about you. This message brought to you by AFSCME Council 13.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham.
Just very, very relieved and thankful and proud of everybody that helped us get to this point. They have done something big. They've done something historic. They've made history.
UAW Local 42 President Mike Cantrell reacting to the UAW winning a skilled trades worker NLRB election at VW's Chattanooga, Tennessee plant. Cantrell says the UAW will immediately start talking with VW about a collective bargaining agreement, the first for the UAW in a foreign-owned auto plant in the U.S.
If we can go to the table and get a good contract for the skilled trade workers, to me, I think it could only seem positive for the rest of the group of Local 42 production workers if they see how important it is to have a union.
71% of the skilled trades workers voted for the UAW. 2,200 United Steelworkers members at ATI, locked out since August 15th, are standing strong. USW Local 1196 President Fran Arabia.
They're very angry that this company we work for is doing this to us. The only thing our union has asked for is a fair contract. That's it. We're not asking for anything above and beyond, into the stratosphere of craziness. We're just asking to sit down and let's look at it logically. And that's all we've asked. And unfortunately, the company has taken this other approach where they're trying to break us, is what they're trying to do. We're going to get through this. And in my opinion, when the smoke clears, we're going to come back stronger than we ever were, because now people that never understood what a union means and what a union can do for you, they'll understand it when we get back to work.
This is Mitch Lawrence with a Sports Minute for Workers Independent News. Charles Barkley, the noted basketball expert, had one of the great lines when explaining why the game's greatest players are doomed to go out with a whimper rather than a bang. You can't beat Father Time, Barkley once observed. Then he added, Father Time is undefeated. Well, we're seeing that now with what is happening to three of the all-time greats in sports history, with basketball's Kobe Bryant, football's Peyton Manning, and golf's Tiger Woods. Bryant recently announced that he's retiring at the end of his 20th season with the Lakers. He might only be 37 years old, but for a wing player to play in the NBA as long as he has, he's the exception to the rule. He's been beset by major injuries the last couple of seasons, and you just wonder if his body can hold up for one more season. Manning, the Broncos Hall of Fame quarterback, isn't even playing these days after suffering a major foot injury. But even before he injured his foot, his play had dropped off to an all-time low, and it looked as if he should just retire. Then there's Woods, more famous than the other two when he was busy dominating professional golf by reeling off wins in the four majors faster than anyone could believe. relief, but he too has been beset by back problems in recent years, and now he's just a shell of the player he once was. The same can be said of Bryant and Manning, who are also losing to Father Time.
Brought to you by the IBEW, 750,000 men and women powering the way for an American comeback.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Just a day job that someone's got to do. It's kinda hard when everyone looks up to you. Try to make it look easy, gonna make it look good, like anybody would. I'm just your average, ordinary, everyday superhero.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. Bat Radio Monday. Every Monday we do some education segments because I think education, hugely important, to use a Donald Trump word. This, to me, the hill, the working class of this country has to die on. They take public education from us. What do we have as a working class? That's why I have asked Fred Klonsky to come and talk to us a little bit about what's going on right now with this Elementary and Secondary Education Act and really the corporatization of our education. Fred was a long-time retired Chicago retired art teacher there in the Chicago area, also an education blogger. Fred, thanks for taking time for us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So, on this program, we talk quite often about the corporatization of education and that whole privatization movement that's going on, really to monetize and steal from our children. And I look at this Elementary and Secondary Education Act that's being banged around. This is just another step towards that corporatization, in my view.
Well, I haven't had time, actually, because it was passed by the House just last week, and is before the Senate coming. There's a Senate vote on it on Monday. I've had a chance to look at some of it, but these laws the bills are huge, and you kind of have to go through it with a fine-tooth comb. But the thing that I've kind of focused on in my blog writing and in my communications with folks is the inclusion of a particular part of the bill that affects special needs students, and this is it's called Pay for Success. And what Pay for Success is it falls under what they call social impact bonds. And what Pay for Success does is that it hands over the work of educating special needs kids to programs that are funded by Wall Street investors like Goldman Sachs. And so, for example, in school districts in Utah and now in early education in Chicago, what the school districts do is that they sell basically bonds to an investor like Goldman Sachs. And when you talk about the corporatization of education, nobody is better at this than Goldman Sachs. And what they do is they set up their own criteria for what counts as curing special needs kids. And for every success that the schools provide, Goldman Sachs is paid a return on their investment. And it gets paid a return on their investment, sometimes $9,000 a year for each student. That payback on these bonds will continue for up to 6 years.
Wow.
So it's like a bounty on every special needs kid that gets pushed out of special education services because they no longer supposedly require it. But the criteria for no longer requiring it is established by Goldman Sachs as an investor and the school system. It doesn't follow what is the normal practice for deciding how you treat special needs kids, which is not whether they no longer receive services, but whether they adequately receive services. It turns special education on its head.
Yeah, and to me, Fred, it would sound like the incentive would be to, at the beginning, label more and more kids as special needs so that you would then be able to say, success, we've cured them, to use your word.
Well, it sort of is like that, except if you establish at the beginning, like say in pre-K or in first grade, that's normally when you do assessments of what the needs are of your students. And so if you were defining, say, 20% of your students as requiring an IEP or what's individual educational plan, and now your school district is successful because it's only 1 out of 100 is needing an IEP or special services. This is considered a success rate, and this is exactly the corporate. This is exactly the corporate model, and that plan, this Pay for Success plan is now included in the new reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, the ESCA. This is it's kind of flying under the radar, as they say. It's not really been picked up by many. That's why I'm so glad that you are having me on, because this kind of corporate public school model of this partnership to reduce the number of special education services for the kids who need it is like the corollary to charter schools, which really are allowed to exclude students with special needs entirely and provide no services. So you have this kind of two sides to the same coin. In the charter model, they simply don't allow kids in or don't provide services at all for students with special needs. And then the schools that remain, the actual real public schools, are now farming out the services, the identification of students with special needs, to a partnership funded or paying out to people like Goldman Sachs to see to it that students are no longer identified as needing them. Now, I go back to my days. I started teaching in the 80s. This is really before the special education reforms really took hold. So I would have, say, a regular class of 24 or 25 students on my roster, and then suddenly 6 or 7 or 8 special needs kids that were kept in a separate room normally, but would come to my room for art, would suddenly show up in my room with no assistant and with no support whatsoever. And now suddenly my class size was over 30.
Wow. And see, I remember that.
But they weren't really on my roster.
Yeah,
so one of the wins over the last 20 years has been to really come up with inclusive models that bring with it special needs assistants or paraprofessionals that come with the kids, that we're able to modify and adapt the curriculum for the needs of those kids. And all that is being, we made gains on that all through the 80s and the 90s. And now we're seeing, just like in every other area of education, this corporate model chipping away at the services that kids who don't go to rich private schools desperately need.
Yeah, because I've been saying for a long time now, this corporate model, outside of all of the cash that's going to be gained by Wall Street and the Gates and the Bloombergs and the Bushes and all of those folks, is a pushback against the mainstreaming of the 80s. Because I remember when I was in college, I originally had gone in, I wanted to be an elementary ed teacher. And I remember being in a classroom doing my student work with a class that had, out of 28 kids, 6 of them were severely disabled and were disruptive beyond means. And I remember going, this is insane. And it actually got me to leave that major and move on to something else.
Well, you're absolutely right. What we saw back in the 60s and the 70s was exactly that. It was, on the one hand, the segregation of kids with special needs, just like we saw the segregation of kids of color. This was what public schools looked like. And I was lucky enough to be a teacher at a time when not only did we look at providing services for special needs kids as our duty, it also became the law. And this was a reform that was all part of the reforms that we saw for labor, for African Americans, for women in the 60s. The rights of students with disabilities became part of the mainstream reform effort. And just like we've seen the corporate model pushing back on the rights of, look at Rahm Emanuel has done in this city in terms of African. We've lost. I don't know if you know this, but we've lost in Chicago over 200,000 African Americans in the last 10 to 15 years, out of not just out of Chicago, but out of the Chicago area, left entirely. Why? Because union jobs have left, because the industrial base of our city has left, and it's had a devastating effect on our schools, which mainly serve the needs of students of color.
Yeah, and you guys have been
it's
following. You guys have been following the Broad Foundation model of shutting down all the schools and privatizing. I mean, Chicago's one of those places that.
In Chicago, Rahm Emanuel has, as you know, I'm sure you know, closed 50 neighborhood schools in mainly African American and Latino neighborhoods. 50. Nowhere in America has any mayor closed 50 public schools at one moment, and at the same time opening up corporate charter schools to replace them. Oftentimes, right across. I mean, I know we were talking about special ed, but you touched on the subject, and it's very important because it's connected to whether special education is funded or not. And so you have the mayor here in Chicago not only closing public schools, but building brand new charter schools right across the street from perfectly good functioning public schools. And so parents will then leave and go to these spanking new buildings, and then the mayor claims that the public schools are under enrolled and shuts them down.
Yeah, like he did with Diet.
Exactly like he did with Diet. And the only reason you know and America knows about Diet is because a dozen members of the community had to starve themselves for 35 days in order to get anybody to pay attention to the fact that this was what the mayor was doing.
Yeah, well, how I found out is, to be honest, my friends at the Badass Teachers Association, who were out in front of this and brought me to their Congress that they did over the summer, and I had met a couple of people from Chicago who laid it out and said, look, this is what's going on. And if it weren't for the teachers, if it weren't for the teachers unions, if it weren't for people finally standing up and saying no more of this stuff, I think Rahm would have wanted to close twice as many schools as he actually did, if I recall right.
You're exactly right. Well, there were 300 on the original closing list, and it was only through the, like you say, the Chicago Teachers Union and the community base that supports them and still does, was the mayor forced to reduce that list down to 50, which was. Even that was way too.
It's substantial, and the reason that that's important is you look at this is the chipping away of different segments, and why I think the special ed component of this is really important is once they do away with those folks, it goes back to the whole Pastor and Niemöller thing during World War II. First they came for the communists, and I wasn't one of those, and by the time they got to me, there's nobody left, and this is kind of the same
right.
goal.
And really, when you're dealing with special needs and special education students, this isn't. It doesn't have normally a broad base of support because this is a tiny minority of students whose only defenders are their parents and their teachers and those who are providing the services. But you're not going to necessarily see large numbers of people writing emails to their legislators and going down to Springfield or going to Washington to lobby on behalf of special needs kids, especially the parents. I mean, I get emails all the time because of my blog from parents of special needs kids in Chicago who don't know who write to me, and I'm a K-5 retired teacher who writes a blog, but who feel the need to write to me to ask, well, what should they do because they have a kid who needs services and doesn't know where to turn. Out in the suburbs, parents, there's networks now, national networks of parents of kids with autism or kids with Down syndrome or other disabilities who network and have organizations to back them. But poor parents in New York or poor parents in Chicago or LA or Detroit, they don't have those networks and support systems to defend the interests of the most needy of our students. And you're right. Who I like to quote on this issue is the educator John Dewey, who said that what I want for all students is what I would want for my own and for my own child. And I think that's the issue with special education is that I was fortunate to have typical kids. They didn't need special needs services, but what I want for all kids is what my own students, what my own children had, and that was an education that was geared to their interests and their needs, and that's just being ripped away by the corporate model from kids who suffer from autism or have reading disabilities or have physical disabilities or have emotional disabilities. They may not be, quote, curable. A child with autism is not necessarily something you can cure. It is who they are. And so the education system has to adopt and modify what they do to the needs of those students, and not come up with systems that simply give them a different label that calls that giving them a different label a success.
Right.
It's not a success to take the services away from students who need them.
Yeah, I agree. And to me, what this is, and someone asked me about 6 months ago, about this whole privatization stuff. And I said, well, really, to me, the first part of it is going back to my experience in college in the 80s, the pushback against mainstreaming and all of that. And really the privatization of education to take it away from the hands of we the people, and the laws that have been passed to make sure all kids have an opportunity. To me, this is the resegregation. Not based on race lines or anything like that, but based on wealth lines.
Well, it's actually based on an economic basis,
right.
But certainly it's the rollback of the rights of minority students, of students of color, is also taking place, and nowhere can you see this better than in Chicago, where the school system is more segregated than at any time. The Southern schools before Brown versus education didn't look as segregated, or maybe they did look. Maybe Chicago schools look exact as schools looked in the South before Brown versus Board of Education.
So last line of questioning then, Fred, what do we do with this? I mean, you've laid out this, and I don't think anyone is in favor of going back to the days where we put kids with disabilities on special buses to take them, hundreds of miles away to special schools, or institutionalizing or any of that stuff. How do we make sure that we don't go back to those days? What should we be doing?
Well, that's really the question, isn't it? And I always say, we just do what we. I mean, I've been an activist my whole life. I know that there are ebbs and flows in things that go on in the streets. We've had times when there's been millions in the streets, and then other times when it doesn't seem like anybody cares. But I just know that from my own experience, I'm 67 years old. I've been retired for 4 years, and I just know that the way this is done is by relying on going out and talking to people, just doing what you're doing, which is talking to people about the corporate and working class divisions that exist in our society, and why do they exist? Why do we have a system in which kids who desperately need help in order to function in our society? Why do we have to make a fuss in order to do this? We don't live in a system that's very humane, very caring about the least needy. But I know that the way in which we fix that is the way in which we've always fixed it, and that's by organizing, taking our issues out, talking about them over and over and over again. Yep. I've been writing about Pay for Success now for a year, and every time people maybe get tired of hearing it, but I'm going to keep writing about it because people have to know that this is what this corporate model is so utterly destructive to the lives and the needs of working families and their children.
Yeah. And what do we do?
We do what we've always done. I mean, I love what you do. I think it's great that you're out there talking about the needs of working families, and I think that's what we do.
What we're seeing, though, is the Hunger Games of education, really.
It can look. I don't know if you saw the videotape of the shooting of Laquan McDonald here in Chicago by this cop, Jason Van Dyke. They tried to hide it for a year so that we wouldn't see it. And sometimes when you see things like that, it becomes very discouraging, and you just kind of wonder, how do we ever get away? It's like a video of police brutality on every week. There's a new one. But I know that I've lived through I've been around it long enough to know that I've seen perfect storms of political action where we win victories, and so I believe in perfect storms. I believe in that when people take to the streets and when people do take action, that it produces results. So I'm optimistic about this if we keep on doing that.
I'm with you. Fred. Fred, I appreciate you taking time for us. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Great talking with you, Fred Klonsky, retired Chicago art teacher, also education blogger. You want to take a look at his writings? We've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. Just click on Fred's name. Take you right there. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1931. That was the day that protesters staged a hunger march on Washington, D.C. 1,600 protesters took part in the march. Communist organizers helped to organize the protest. One of the demands of the march was unemployment insurance for workers who had lost their jobs. The country was in the throes of the Great Depression, caused by the stock market crash of 1929. Far too many people had seen their entire life savings wiped out by the crash and subsequent bank failures. Millions were out of work and families were losing their homes. There was a growing anger in the country over what was perceived as President Herbert Hoover's indifference and ineffectual dealing with the crisis. The media focused on the communist ties to the D.C. Hunger March, but the idea of the March on Washington grew. The next year, a Pittsburgh priest led an army of 12,000 jobless men to the Capitol to demand unemployment legislation. Then that May, a former cannery worker named Walter B. Walters organized World War I veterans to protest in D.C. They called themselves the Bonus Expeditionary Forces. They demanded early payment of a bonus that Congress had promised them for their service in World War I. The movement of working people grew as a weary and hungry nation demanded action from its elected leaders. As a result, Americans voted President Hoover out of office in the 1932 election. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected on a platform that the U.S. government should act to address the dire conditions of the millions of unemployed. Finally, in August 1935, President Roosevelt signed the Social Security Act into law. This act contained a provision for unemployment insurance. It was a major step towards establishing unemployment protections for workers in the United States.
Tales of American Political History with Clinton Porter Hackney.
On November 26, 1941, 6 Japanese aircraft carriers sailed from Japan to a position just northwest of the Hawaiian Islands. The carriers contained 408 airplanes, which were prepared to launch an air attack on the U.S. naval fleet at Pearl Harbor, along with other U.S. facilities and assets on the islands. The first wave of 183 planes dropped their first torpedoes at 7:48 a.m. Hawaiian time. The Americans woke to sounds of alarms, explosions, and gunfire. Ammunition lockers were locked, guns were unmanned, and airplanes were parked up against each other, preventing many takeoffs. The attack was over 90 minutes after it began. 2,403 Americans died. Though it has constantly been couched as a surprise attack, it was not much of a surprise at all. Being unprepared is not the same as being surprised. Join us again for the context of 1941. This is Clinton Porter Hackney at cphackney.com.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm Eric Wustewald. The Secretary of Defense, Ash Carter, recently announced that the U.S. military will open up all combat positions to women. But on Fox and Friends, Fox News correspondent Leah Gabrielle was dismissive of the new policy. Here's Gabrielle and host Elizabeth Hasselbeck.
Can they really handle this? Is this going to make our military stronger? Because the real question here is, it shouldn't be an equal opportunity employer, I don't think. The question is, can women make the military, these specific units, stronger?
I'm hearing terms like Petri dish. Do you believe this is a social experiment? If so, is this the time?
It is a social experiment. I've been in that social experiment. When I became a combat fighter pilot, I was one of the first women to do it. And I had more senior male officers say, we don't know if this was a wise decision or not.
Other conservative commentators also responded with vitriol, including radio host Rush Limbaugh, who called the move absurd, and the website National Review Online, who called it, quote, a historic mistake for which, quote, America will pay a blood price. But as Defense Secretary Carter noted during his announcement, women will be allowed to serve in all military combat roles because, quote, we cannot afford to cut ourselves off from half the country's talent and skills. For more on this and other stories, please visit MediaMatters.org.
Standing up to conservatives and corporatists every weeknight. The Rick Smith Show.
So now you see the light. Hey, stand up for your right. Come on, get up, stand up. Stand up for your right.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So today we've been doing our education segments, looking at special education. And, I go back to my days in college. Initially started off as an elementary ed teacher. That was my major. It's what I wanted to do. And then, thrown into that fire of the first teaching experience, getting into the classroom and seeing the effects of mainstreaming on the school that I was, it just kind of sent me going, I don't know that I can do this. Class size is getting bigger, all the disruptions, all of that stuff, which I thought it'd be a great opportunity to reach out to someone who is actively teaching and also has a special needs child of her own. Bianca Tennis is a special ed teacher there in New York in the K-2 program. Bianca, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me.
So, I go back to my experience, and I think a lot of this stuff you take from your own experience. And I remember back in the 80s, the early kind of pushing kids with special needs into regular classrooms and the pain and the disruption. Things have gotten better, but I see things going kind of backwards.
Well, I think we've developed probably since the 80s a continuum of classrooms and settings for children. So we have all kinds of different settings, and there's a lot of flexibility. Children, we usually don't push them into a general ed class or an inclusion class until they're ready. But what I have found since the implementation of the Common Core and high-stakes testing, a lot of kids that were doing very well and being very successful in an inclusion class where you had, say, 17 children who did not have an IEP or a learning disability, and then perhaps 5 or 6 children with an IEP. That's becoming less and less of a possibility for many children because the curriculum and the standards have become so inappropriately difficult that it becomes very challenging for teachers to differentiate and meet the needs of those students. So inclusion, those kinds of programs are becoming more difficult to maintain.
Because as I've been saying throughout the day today, we know someone who they have a special needs child, and they don't think their kid should be taking the PSSA, the standardized test at the end of the year, because they just don't think that there's any way that they're ever going to pass it. And the message that it sends to that kid of being a failure only makes in their opinion, things worse.
Well, I can tell you, this year I'm teaching a K-1-2 self-contained class, but in the past I've taught 4th grade and 5th grade. And administering these tests to a child that is going to fail is a horrible, horrible situation. Many of these children have made tremendous progress over the school year. They're feeling good about themselves, and then testing season rolls around, and all of a sudden they're getting this intense message of failure. And a lot of these children, they really internalize that message of failure. And we work so hard to build their confidence and their self-esteem. And that's really what I didn't want to see happening to my own child, which is why I tried opting them out about 3 years ago. So it's damaging and it's absolutely inappropriate. And with testing, we're seeing it trickle down to kindergarten. And I know there's talk of testing in pre-K in the coming year.
Jeez. Well, why don't we just test them in the womb?
Exactly. I mean, we laugh about it because it's ridiculous. But those of us who are working with these children really see how damaging it is. And that's one of the biggest frustrations is we have people making policy and decisions that have never worked with children.
I mean, because the reality is you're never going to, and I remember because of No Child Left Behind, there was supposed to be 100% of all the children were supposed to pass this test. And look, you can't get 100% of the people on a sunny day to say the sky's blue, let alone pass some of these tests. And given the different ability levels of all the kids in this scenario, I just think what we've done is we're moving to this assembly line education model that all kids don't learn the same and all kids aren't going to get it the first time around. I struggle with where we're going.
Absolutely. And, you know, some children are very bright and are not good test takers. And what happens is we diminish the focus on their strengths. So you might have some children who are amazing artists, who are very gifted writers. And because they can't fit their talents and their strengths into this little box, they're being told that they're not good enough, that what they bring to the table is not what we're looking for. And it's just a very dangerous message to give to children because, like I said, they really do internalize it and it stays with them. There's a lot of studies that show, especially for children who are very creative, if you don't give them an outlet for that, they tend to become underachievers. And going into high school, they have a higher rate of dropout. So there are all of these unintended consequences to what we're doing. And I hope that politicians and policymakers are really starting to hear that.
Now, in your career, as you've seen this, I'm sure you've seen some really just incredible changes as you know, we continue to defund education and then ask for teachers to do more and schools to do more and take on more responsibility, especially with high-risk students and students in high poverty areas.
Absolutely. And I can speak for what's happening in New York, and I know it's happening around the country in different forms, but we have these school takeovers where when the school is not performing based on test scores, they're given a year to turn around, sometimes 2 years, and they're basically told turn around or a year school will go into something called receivership, where a private entity will come in and take over the school. And it's really, it's not based in any kind of research or evidence. It's a complete setup for failure. And for children with disabilities, I mean, it damages all the students, but especially the children who struggle, because now the pressure to perform on these tests is even greater. And I can't even imagine that pressure, perform or your school will be closed, because kids are smart. And even if we're not telling them directly, they pick up on it.
Well, I know, and to highlight that, you know, the year we began opting our kids out of the high stakes tests, my oldest daughter was in 5th grade and she was play teaching with her younger brother and sister. And she was, you know, basically going on saying, if you don't pass this test, they're going to take money from the school. They're going to close the school down. And it was, you going, what? Where'd that come from?
They're smart. They pick up on things, you know, and that's, I've heard from policymakers, well, it's the teachers. If they just protected the children from it, or if the pressure is coming from the teachers, and nothing could be farther from the truth. Every educator I know works very hard to protect their students from the external pressures, but they're still there. You know, when our kids only have 20 minutes of recess, when they're being told from the 4th day of school, we're behind, we have to catch up, we have so much to do, they feel it. It's not a natural way for children to learn. It's based on this bizarre adult notion of what's going to make education better.
See, I've often believed, Bianca, that what we need to be doing is we need to make the school days much longer. We need to make the school year much longer. And we need to have less time of grill and drill and much more time of play and experiential learning and getting your hands dirty and playing with worms and doing all of those things that, you know, we want kids to learn at their pace. And maybe even, you know, be doing something radical like doing away with this whole notion of you're going to go on to 2nd grade and 3rd grade. Maybe kids will move along at their pace.
You know, I think there's a lot to be said for that. You know, experiential learning is so important, and especially when we talk about poverty. You know, people talk about the achievement gap, and in that, a lot of times we see a vocabulary gap and a gap in different experiences. And a lot of these curriculum makers and textbook writers, they try and produce these programs that supposedly will increase a child's vocabulary. And, you know, you can do that, but there is no better teacher than actual experience. And I think when we talk about these standards as, you know, the miracle cure, what we need to be doing is getting kids into museums, getting them to concerts, getting them to parks and botanical gardens, and creating these really rich experiences for them. And before we start to talk about tests, we really need to make sure that every child is having a really rich learning experience and environment with a lot of opportunity to play and have social interaction and problem solve on their own. And we don't have that. That costs money.
And that's the thing. I mean, we're in the midst of the Hunger Games here in Pennsylvania. We had a governor for 4 years, and thank goodness he's gone. But for 4 years, gutted $1 billion a year out of public education, laid off some 30,000 education professionals across the Commonwealth, and then expected miraculous results with fewer teachers, less resources. In Philadelphia, they don't even have nurses or librarians in half of the schools. And they expect miracles to happen out of And I know you can't throw money at the problem, but if you don't have any and there's snow coming in your roof, something's got to give, right?
Yeah, and when people say, "Well, it's not something we can solve with money," that always gets me. Because they say, first, let's make a list. Let's see how much it costs to make sure every school has a librarian, a fully stocked, functioning library, adequate social workers, psychologists, programs to enable all parents to come to school for parent-teacher conferences, whether it's vouchers for taxis or transportation. Let's make sure we have field trips and wraparound services and before school and after school help. Let's make sure we have all those things. Let's see what it costs. Let's make sure every school has that, and then let's talk about money. Because it's a really flawed argument. And I think part of the problem is how we fund our schools in this country. We are one of the only developed nations where affluent, wealthy schools have more funding and more resources than poor schools. It doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense. And that's no more apparent than here in Pennsylvania, where we don't really have a funding formula. It's basically based on property taxes. So obviously wealthier areas are going to have a much better tax base than poorer urban areas and even some of the rural areas. So you then have this complete, lopsided education system. And in the special education world, much, much more lopsided when you're looking at the kind of resources that the poorer areas don't have that the wealthier areas do.
And that is really, to me, one of the most upsetting parts of all this is that, especially as a parent of a child with special needs, that your zip code really does determine the level of services your child is going to receive. Because a lot of these services are not reimbursed with federal dollars. So there's a real incentive to provide as little as possible. And I have to say the schools want to do the best they can. They're working with, they're working with nothing. And it really is the Hunger Games and it's survival. And every child, regardless of whether or not they have an IEP and they have special needs, deserve an appropriate education.
No.
For children who learn differently, when you don't give them the services they need, when we don't start when they're young, we're really putting them at a disservice for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, but that's not profitable, Bianca.
With their education.
That's not profitable. We can't put cash in the wealth class's pockets with that kind of thinking.
Nope.
And that's what's sad about this.
I'm sorry, say that again?
And that's what's sad about this whole thing. It all comes down to this move towards privatization. And that's what's frustrating to me.
Absolutely. And what I find really disgusting is the narrative that a lot of these groups that are really pro-reform into the privatization movement, they're putting out this idea that this is all supposed to really close the achievement gap, help students in poverty, help students with disabilities, help students of color. And the fact is, at least here in New York, since the implementation of Common Core testing and the Common Core, the rate of failure for economically disadvantaged students, English language learners, special education students, students of color, the rate of failure has really increased extremely disproportionately than their economically advantaged white counterparts. So we are really hurting the most vulnerable students. And those numbers, nobody wants to talk about them. I don't see them in the headlines of the newspaper, which is very frustrating because to me, that's the story, that this is all built on lies.
No, you're right. And where you have the schools that are struggling, you have the schools that have the most problems outside of the school, as well as some of the problems inside the school that I would say start a lot with the funding. Let me ask you about you personally. I mean, I understand in New York that kids in some special needs programs are kind of out of the testing regime. Am I getting that right?
Are out of it in terms of, they don't have to take the test?
Right. Which I would think
a very, very small percentage of students qualify for what we call an alternate assessment, and it's a very stringent criteria. It's essentially for students who are severely disabled. And just to put that into context, there are students who are not eligible for the alternate assessment who have to blink their answers. This is something that school districts are really discouraged from giving to students, and there is a cap to how many students the school district can give the alternate assessment. So the majority of students with disabilities are taking these tests, although I have to say, thankfully, more and more opting out, and we expect a tsunami of opt-out next year. We think this is just going to continue until we take back our public schools and New York State gets it right. But as a special ed teacher, I can tell you, fifth graders in New York State sit for 3 hours of testing 3 days in a row, 2 times, so that's 18 hours of testing.
Wow.
And if they happen to be students with a disability who is also an English language learner, they take additional tests.
And if
So
you can't sit,
that's criminal to me.
and it's criminal. But what if you can't sit for 3 hours? What if you've got a kid who's got severe behavioral problems, severe problems that they're just not going to sit for 3 hours? It's just never going to happen. That's an expectation
and
well
that
out of this
happens all
world.
the time. And you know what's ridiculous is that test score is supposedly giving useful information. So that's the real fallacy here. You know, that test score is meaningless. It hurts the child, it hurts the teacher, and yet there are so many people who want to put stock in that score. And as a parent of a child with a disability, I was extremely frustrated when I first started down this road. In the beginning, I was told I could not opt my son out. He's legally required to take it. I would have to keep him home from 12 days of school. I mean, it was really ridiculous and very eye-opening. But I called a number of disability rights advocacy groups, and I was stunned and just disgusted by what I heard. Many of them said, no, we believe in this testing. This testing is necessary to shine a bright light. That was their word, bright light. We need to shine a bright light on the inequalities. If we don't have these tests, students with disabilities will be stuck in basements again. And I kept saying to them, but what about the individual child who's being hurt, who's crying, pulling their hair out? And the response I received several times from several different groups was, we're really concerned about this issue at the policy level. This is not about the individual child.
Wow.
So that's kind of what we're dealing with.
Yeah, but sadly, I mean, you know, as someone who wasn't thrilled with the idea of absolute mainstreaming that I was seeing going on as a college student back in the 80s, I also don't want things going back to where the people are stuck in the basement or sent to special schools, who knows where, or even institutionalized. I think that's the wrong road to go. But
well, I think that we've come a long way, and I'm not sure that this testing is what would prevent that from ever happening. I think that we've come a long way. Parents are a lot more savvy. Parents are great advocates for their children now. And the IEP is a really powerful document. And students with disabilities have protection in their individual education plans. And as long as we make those really very well thought out, strong documents, those are the best protection, because those are your civil rights. If you violate a child's IEP, you're violating their civil rights. So I think as special education teachers and parents of students with disabilities, we really have to fight for that IEP. We have to educate each other. And that's really what will protect our children.
as long as it's a public school, correct?
Absolutely.
I mean,
in a private school, it's a whole other can of worms.
Yeah, you see, we continue down the privatization road to where everything's a charter or a parochial school or a private school. Then all of that stuff's out the window, the IEPs and all that out the window, right?
Yeah, they don't even have to let you in. I mean, I know that at least in New York, Governor Cuomo came up with, he called it anti-creaming legislation, that would supposedly prevent charter schools from only accepting the top students, from dismissing special education students. A lot of charter schools in New York have very high suspension rates. But, you know, that would require monitoring, which takes money, which I don't see happening.
Yeah,
so when we talk about charter schools, they're selective. They are not beholden to a child's rights as they're outlined in their IEP in the same way other schools are. So, you know, it's really public schools. That's the beautiful thing about them. Our doors are open to everyone.
Yeah. So last question I've got for you, Bianca. How's your child doing in all of this?
He's doing great. He has an amazing teacher. This is his second year with her, and he's making progress. He's happy. He loves school. He's confident, and he has never taken one of these tests. And I plan to keep it that way.
Good for you. Bianca Tanis, I appreciate you taking some time for us. Thanks so much, and keep it up. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks. Take care.
Really great talking with you. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
I see them blue for me and you, and I say to myself,
Yes, it is all about the children, even after they're born. Rick Smith.
There is this sort of unanimity of opinion that something has got to get done here.
Historic United Nations climate talks now underway in Paris.
Technology-driven advances are relentless. They're going to drive down costs, and they're basically going to make the cheapest thing to do the cleanest thing to do.
Governments and billionaires launch huge new investments in clean energy. Plus,
governments currently engaged in this round of climate talks will want to know that there is more than just an executive branch in our system of government.
Republicans working hard to undermine progress in any way they can.
All of that undermining and progress straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comments.
Well, the world is in turmoil and falling apart in so many different ways, especially with ISIS. Our president is worried about global warming. What a ridiculous situation.
And no one knows ridiculous situations better than you, Mr. Trump. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, it's quite remarkable with so much going on in the news. It's easy to not even notice the fact that this historic climate change conference is now actually underway in Paris, as you have been waiting for and anticipating for so many months.
Oh, yeah, it's history being made in Paris right now at the Global Climate Talks. The nations of the world are now meeting in Paris for the 21st Conference of the Parties of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or COP21 for short. The goal is to complete a comprehensive international binding agreement for all nations to cut the greenhouse gas emissions that cause dangerous global warming in order to keep the planet's temperature from rising more than 2 degrees Celsius over pre-industrial times.
Yeah, good luck with that.
I know. It's about 3.5 degrees Fahrenheit. Human activity has already raised temperatures by 1 degree Celsius. So, by the way, we are halfway there.
Just to clarify, halfway to the bad thing, not halfway to the good thing.
That's right. U.S. President Barack Obama opened the UN climate conference with an acknowledgement that developed countries like the U.S. bear responsibility to take action.
There is such a thing as being too late. And when it comes to climate change, that hour is almost upon us. I've come here personally as the leader of the world's largest economy and the second largest emitter to say that the United States of America not only recognizes our role in creating this problem, we embrace our responsibility to do something about it.
A successful global agreement includes transparent mechanisms for all countries to review their progress and ratchet up their targets as new technology becomes available. It includes measures to reduce deforestation and the biggest area of conflict, funding for developing nations so that they can prepare for climate change impacts and hopefully leapfrog over the pollution phase of development while still lifting their people out of poverty. And most importantly,
that it is an ambitious target that seeks a low carbon global economy over the course of this century.
in other words, phasing out fossil fuels completely. One thing the Paris conference will not do is solve climate change. National pledges to reduce emissions so far are not enough to stay below the key threshold of 2 degrees Celsius. So this is only the beginning. The talks create the architecture, the framework for the decades-long transition to a low-carbon and eventually zero-carbon economy. This is the first time all nations have agreed to do so. President Obama concluded his participation in Paris with a hopeful message.
I'm optimistic. I think we're going to solve it. I think the issue is just going to be the pace and how much damage is done before we are able to fully apply the brakes.
And so far, several major new financing programs have already been launched. The White House announced 2 sweeping initiatives. The U.S. and 20 developed nations will increase investment in clean energy research and development. A separate initiative headed by Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates will mobilize $20 billion in private venture capital investment. And India announced a new global solar energy partnership with 121 developing countries. But here in the U.S., congressional Republicans still trying to undermine President Obama in Paris.
No.
This week passing 2 new resolutions to overturn Obama's landmark new emission standards for power plants, even though the White House will veto the legislation. They said it's to send a message to the world community that the U.S. might not abide by any agreement.
And to send a message that they don't like this planet really at all. They have no interest in keeping it livable, apparently.
Yet the Republicans are out of step with Americans. A new New York Times CBS poll this week finds 2/3 of Americans want the U.S. to sign on to the UN agreement.
For much more on the stories we covered today, including COP21, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us and follow us on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Earlier today, I got an email, and this is one of those things that kind of goes to what we've been talking about here, about school funding, about the Hunger Games of education, where we're pitting one group against another. I win means you have to lose, and vice versa. So I get this email from one of my kids' schools, and the principal saying tonight is corporate night at this particular restaurant. Go there and sign up, to go there and spend some money, and a portion of that will be then donated back to us, and it will help our parent advisory board or whatever it was. And you look at the number, and you stop and think about this for a second, how far we have come as a society. When I was a kid, I don't remember, maybe it was going on, but I don't remember the schools really pimping different businesses, choosing a business and saying, this is who we're going to sponsor with, or this is who we're going to promote to all of our parents and students and put up on a pedestal. It's a weird kind of dynamic. But if you look at it in the context that we've been starving education, if you look at it in the context that, especially here in Pennsylvania over the last several years, you've seen the attacks on public education spending and really a push to defund and kind of, privatize education. When you look at it from the frame that that's what's been going on, this is the last vestige of hope for our public schools, to be beggars. To create a situation where there's either less opportunity or we partner with corporate interests and, of course, give over a large portion of control. And this is one of those things that I've been talking about for years, because you may remember several years back my complaining about a school district in the Allentown area that was literally selling, advertising on the side of their buses. And then, I had a bunch of people emailing me going, oh, Rick, that's nothing. You should see this. To where they've actually got in the seats in front of them, they're advertised like a taxi cab advertisement on the seats in front of the kids. And you go, at some point, do we go, that's not a good thing? Do we at not some point go, I don't want my kids advertised to 24/7. I mean, you've got that box in the house that is constantly berating them with, hey, you want this? Hey, you got to have this. Hey, you got to have that. And the child mind, not developed like yours and mine, or I hope. I hope most of us are developed. But you look at this and you go, our kids shouldn't be beaten with this kind of messaging constantly. And it's what's going on. And that's the sad part in all of this. And the angering part. I send my kids to school so that they learn, not so that they become fodder for the corporate message. Be it the reading program brought to you by, whomever, this pizza joint or that chain restaurant or whatever. I don't want them constantly berated with, things on the bus, emails. I don't know. Is it me? Or is this just the new world? Is this where we live? And I guess I just have to get over it. Is that the point? I mean, and if that's the point, have we surrendered the innocence of our children, the eyes and ears of just to give them the opportunity to get something of an education? I mean, at some point, that question has to be asked, because that email just made me go, what are we doing? Really? We're going to pressure parents because all parents want their kids to have the best possible opportunities. Are we pressuring parents now into going to XYZ restaurant in the hopes that a small portion will be donated back to the school, at which the restaurant then writes off of their taxes? So basically, we're paying for it anyway. And I get these Catholic school advocates and these private school advocates who are bombing me with emails saying, well, we need the EITC, the Educational Improvement Tax Credit, so that, businesses can give money to private schools and write it off on their taxes so that you, the taxpayer, can pick up the bill so that we can have private schools. And I'm going, but, if that's the case, let's just fund the damn schools then. Because at the end of it, we still are. I mean, that's the really fascinating part in all of this for me. We still are. We're the ones footing the bill. It's just a different way of dressing it up, a different way of making it appear. But at the end of the day, you, me, our kids, we're the ones picking this stuff up. And if we're not, it means diminished opportunities for our children. And that's the part that, that frustrates me, because I look at what we've been talking about today in looking at special education. And this I win, you lose, I win, however that works out, it still means diminished opportunities for some, because we've got this limited resource. And that's the part where the people who want to privatize education are pitting us against one another, saying, sorry, if we give those kids who have special needs extra attention, what about your children? And that's how the division happens. Instead of saying that, what, we need to be making sure that everyone has an opportunity. We're saying, no, not so much, not so fast. So I got to tell you, just a little frustrated about the whole direction that we are heading with public education, and which is why I keep having folks on the program talking about why it's so important that we get involved and get active. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast, the Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go, wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Love to hear what you have to say. See you back here tomorrow. Thanks so much for being here.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
It's color like tide flood beneath the sway. Imperial, mysterious, and amorous array. Democracy is coming to the USA.